Chapter 61, Destroying the Demon Queen. Ethan knew that true learning and mere data transfer were not the same. Real learning demanded comprehension, not just copying and pasting information. Morgana stared at his supercomputer genetic engine interface in disbelief. She unleashed a torrent of data, nearly incomprehensible terabytes per second, yet Ethan's system processed every bit flawlessly. His computational power matched hers. It was astonishing. Morgana wielded a fourth-generation divine body, complete with the latest upgrades. Though she'd never dared to link directly to the death god Karl's core system, she had reverse-engineered his divine body technology to enhance herself. On paper, Karl's original template should have granted even greater capacity. Even so, a fourth-generation divine body outclassed any third-generation deity by orders of magnitude. And yet here was Ethan, keeping pace. A spark of curiosity lit Morgana's eyes. Could it be that Kryptonian technology, so rare and so advanced, was responsible for his extraordinary performance? Morgana's shock only deepened with each question Ethan asked. He wasn't firing off idle queries. He was probing crucial details that demanded a complete, nuanced understanding of her research. If he hadn't already read and mastered every fragment of her work, there was no way he could zero in like this. And that realization stunned her. In the entire universe, only two research gods ranked above her, the vanished spatial principal and Jilon, the god of time. Morgana herself stood among the highest echelons of scientific deities, yet she knew that even she and the death god Karl had staggered at the sheer complexity of her findings, struggling for days to digest what Ethan inhaled in minutes. The implication was inescapable. Ethan must be one of the universe's preeminent research gods himself. A tremor ran through her limbs, not from fear, but from depleted energy reserves. Forcing herself to stand firm, she fixed him with a glare and hissed, "Where did you come from, freak?" In that moment, Morgana realized she had become utterly irrelevant to him. Ethan had finally mastered the fourth-generation divine body. Not only had he absorbed the clock technique bestowed by death god Karl, but he'd also assimilated Morgana's own fourth-generation space-time wormhole art. Cornered by the threat of annihilation, Morgana had gambled on one simple assumption. Ethan wouldn't be able to comprehend both techniques at once and would inevitably beg her for guidance. She was wrong. Morgana's eyes flickered with surprise and anger. "So you already know your fate," she spat. Ethan remained perfectly calm. "Bitch," he said, voice low. "Fuck you." In an instant, he unleashed a catastrophic surge of Qigong energy. The blast struck the Martian surface with such force that it ripped open a vast crater, tearing through miles of rock, all the way down to the planet's molten core. Morgana's indignant scream was cut off as the shockwave overtook her. Anticipating any hidden counterattack, Ethan had preemptively scattered fragments of his own atoms across the Martian crust, an insurance policy against surprises. Now, as the energy wave radiated outward for hundreds of kilometers, he activated his supervision and watched the surrounding atomic fields churn. Every trace of Morgana's power shattered and disintegrated. Where once she'd stood, there was only silence, and a crimson wasteland marked by the sheer scale of Ethan's destructive might. Alone amid the ruin, Ethan stood unchallenged, the undisputed master of the fourth-generation divine body. Chapter 12. The Limits of Resurrection. In that case, even if Morgana were brought back, it wouldn't be a true restoration of her dark essence and data. Ethan frowned, turning over Kesha's words in his mind. The gods of the Super Seminary were notoriously hard to kill. They had several backup mechanisms for coming back from the dead. The most familiar was dark matter information resurrection, storing a deity's physical blueprint in the dark plane so it could be reconstituted later. A more streamlined process, pure dark data resurrection, discarded the physical form entirely and saved only the informational imprint scattered across the shadow realm. Because a god's data was already dispersed throughout that plane, they often favored this method. But Kesha had revealed an even harsher protocol, a technique that had struck fear into Morgana's heart in the original timeline. Rather than preserving anything, it eradicated every trace of dark matter and shadow data, wiping the god from existence forever. In that scenario, Morgana would lose not only herself, but also the demon Agu, the very being who had once taken a dagger meant for her. both would vanish completely, as though they had never been. The only alternative was physical data resurrection, a process that reconstructed a deity or super soldier from the real plane's records without touching the dark plane at all. It was a method typically reserved for advanced civilizations seeking to restore their champions, but without dark plane backups, even that offered no guarantee of returning Morgana's full power. Ethan's jaw tightened. If Kesha's draconian option was ever used, Morgana would be gone forever. No second chance, no safety net in the shadows. Ethan studied the data on Edgy, the clone. On paper, she looked identical to the original, but her resurrection was incomplete. Like Angel Yan, Angel Ji-Shin, and Angel Juai, Aji had been pieced back together from nothing more than backup files stored deep in the supercomputer's archives. None of them were truly flesh and blood. He dealt with Morgana's copies the same way every time, with lethal precision. Each time she materialized, Ethan ended her existence without hesitation. He didn't believe any of these replicas were the real Morgana. At best, they reminded him of Orochimaru, loathsome, endlessly persistent. At least Orochimaru had a weakness. If you killed him often enough, his soul would finally dissolve. But here, within the impenetrable walls of the Super Seminary, and backed by a god, rooting out Morgana's soul seemed impossible. And yet, logic demanded that Morgana wouldn't dare return to Blue Star under such watchful eyes. If she'd been unprepared, Holy Kesha's forces would have annihilated her long ago. Had she somehow rewritten the seminary's defenses? Was there another layer to her plan that they hadn't seen? Ethan rubbed his temples. Does she really expect to come back here? He muttered to himself. He leaned forward, staring out at the barren plain beyond the command center's viewport. The silence pressed in on him, heavy with possibility. If Morgana truly intended to strike again, nothing about this conflict would ever be the same. And somehow, he knew, she already had her next move in place. A hidden threat still lurked in her blind spot. The god of death, Karl, had long coveted Morgana, the fragrant bait, and had spent years scheming to force Holy Kesha to back down. He'd even secured an alliance with the Fiery Sun civilization, and the Liang civilization had agreed to cooperate, though neither dared show themselves before Holy Kesha. They had good reason to be afraid. Holy Kesha depended on her unrivaled computing power and the omnipresent reach of her silver-winged domain. In fact, that domain extended to every point she could perceive. Beyond her visual range, she could still strike with impunity. From her stronghold, she could dispatch a Star Fate, a dark silver weapon armed with a god-killing engine, on years-long hunts for targets like Morgana. Every detail of its wormhole transport and operation was overseen personally by Kesha. To date, no god or super soldier in the known universe has managed to withstand the Silver Wing. Ethan, meanwhile, was fully absorbed in his research into fourth-generation divine bodies, so he put this looming threat on the back burner. One thing was certain, though. Morgana would come again. And when she did, Ethan would be ready to eliminate her once and for all. Ethan's gaze snapped to the distant blue star. "The sun's light, Lena," he whispered. A sudden surge of dark energy flooded him, bright as a rising sun, so intense that even his cells seemed to awaken. In their world, one's power is measured by how much dark energy they can wield and store. Most can unleash 100 units at once and keep 1,000 in reserve. Ethan, by contrast, could only muster a single unit in any given burst and carry no more than 10. Chapter 62. The Arrogant Liquor. As the future supreme god of the Liang civilization, Delena possesses vast reserves of dark energy and an astonishing power output, though most of her divine permissions remain sealed behind genetic locks. Even so, her god-killing prowess is unrivaled. She can ignite her own divine form in a blazing inferno. More terrifying still, Delena wields solar energy with surgical precision, summoning catastrophic flare bombardments whose destructive yield rivals that of N2-class weapons. Unlike nuclear arms, her flares emit no lingering radiation, but their thermodynamic force is enough to vaporize second-generation and lower supersoldiers on contact, and even overwhelm third-generation warriors with ease. Any enhanced body, not specifically engineered to withstand extreme heat or explosive shockwaves, stands no chance against her atomic-level onslaught. Liang's greatest technological triumph, this sun-born devastation reduces adversaries to ash before they can even draw a breath. an ultimate demonstration of Dylena's dominance on the cosmic battlefield. What follows is a clearer, more natural rendering of the original message, with Luther renamed to the male Ethan, and all key details preserved. Even the innocuous-sounding radiation-free microflares are only the beginning of Reyna's arsenal. She can unleash true micro-flare barrages, deploy medium-scale flare bombs, call down colossal solar flares, and even detonate localized supernova blasts. Yet her ultimate technique is often mistranslated as solar incarnation. In reality, it's called Nirvana rebirth, for the Sunlight Plan's highest purpose isn't destruction but transformation. When Reyna attains her full solar incarnation, she transcends her physical form and becomes a pure, sentient energy being, a living star. All of this background comes straight from the Legend of Heroes anime and Salalei's printed novel, Legend of Kamigawa, Heroes of the Company, Volume 1, The Battle of Tianhe Arc. It's worth emphasizing that the glowing orbs Reyna casually fires at the Xiangbing Company are not radiation-free microflares. She actually avoids using them whenever possible. After all, she's hardly a deity bent on wanton annihilation. As for the Kryptonian Ethan, he's obsessed with recruiting Reyna, not for any base desire, but because he covets her phenomenal solar abilities. Ethan stared at the holo display, jaw clenched. How can we harness the sun's light? He ran through the possibilities in seconds. 1. Ambush Delana, drag her into the temporal chamber, and force her to reveal everything. 2. Kidnap Delana outright and extort the Liang civilization for both the Sunlight supergene data and its backup copy. 3. Do nothing. Let Liang collapse under its own weight, then claim Delana and the gene in the aftermath. He rubbed his temples. Too many projects were already vying for his attention, and locking himself away in the temporal chamber to experiment on Delana, he'd go mad from loneliness. Worse still, the thought felt wrong. After all, during that late-night anime binge, he'd proclaimed Delana his wife. He couldn't betray her. Enough, Ethan told himself. First, I'll finish merging Broly and Doomsday. After that, I'll figure out the Sunlight gene. He pushed the Sunlight plan to the back of his mind and turned back to his console. Suddenly, the chamber doors burst open. A familiar, chilling voice echoed through the room. By your Uncle Carl, Morgana has returned. Chapter X, The Demon Queen's Fall. The dead planet drifted in perfect silence, its cracked surface illuminated only by distant starlight, light years away from Earth's familiar blue glow. Morgana stood at its center, surveying the desolation beneath her heels. Not long ago, she had been a proud, immortal sorceress, feared by gods and mortals alike. Yet here she was, reduced to supplication. Ethan, she began, her voice taut with forced humility, I restored you from death's door. The very breath in your lungs. Wasn't it granted by me? A plea courtesy at least, would not have hurt. Before her stood the man in the purple cloak, Ethan, once broken and helpless, now reborn with a cold fire in his eyes. He folded his arms and met her gaze without a flicker of gratitude. Titles matter here, he said, his tone low and mocking. From this moment on, you will call me Queen Morgana. Her blood ran cold at the absurd contradiction. Morgana, the ruthless demon queen, now summoned to address another by her own name. She forced a sneer. Very well, Miss Morgana, she snapped, curtsying with all the aristocratic disdain she could muster. A soft, echoing chuckle drifted from the shadows. Emerging from a fissure in the planet's crust was Death God Carl, his form wreathed in darkness. He leaned casually against a jagged rock, eyes gleaming with unnerving calm. I am Uncle Carl, he announced, voice cool as void still air. Yet I struggle to lend credibility to one who steals titles even as he shouts of justice. Morgana's fists clenched. You who called Earth backward dare to lecture me on honor? She hissed. Carl shrugged, as if the question bored him. Honor isn't measured by distance from Earth, nor by the grandeur of one's cloak. For the first time in centuries, Morgana felt the weight of power slip from her. The hunter had become the prey, mercy the rarest and most perilous of currencies. She straightened her shoulders, emerald eyes blazing. In that case, she said, voice low and dangerous, let us see which of us still holds the true measure of power. Chapter Text. Where's the hold-up? Ethan demanded, his hand tightening around the gilded hourglass. Queen Morgana floated within her cultivation tank, her robes billowing like storm clouds. At her side hovered Death God Carl, arms crossed, his expression half amused, half wary. "I only returned a few hours ago," Ethan said, his voice low but tense. "And in that time I was assaulted. How do you intend to compensate me for the trauma, the medical bills, the therapy?" Morgana's eyes flared with guilt. "Ethan, I am so sorry. Save apologies," he shot back. "I'm grateful you resurrected me, but I refuse to be treated like a test subject." Carl drifted forward. "Your Majesty sacrificed untold resources to bring him back. Ethan knows he had to sign the life debt contract, and he agreed to bear any risks." Morgana glared at Carl. "Stop twisting the truth. This was never meant to be exploitation." "But if you won't cover his medical expenses," Carl smirked, "you can always go entertain yourself with Kesha in the pleasure gardens." Morgana's glare could have frozen the sturdiest warrior. "Carl," he shrugged, unfazed. "Fine, but don't say I didn't offer a solution." Ethan's jaw clenched. "I'll accept restitution, full coverage for treatment, plus fair compensation in coin." Morgana nodded. "Of course, the Royal Vault will underwrite your medical scholarship. We'll dispatch the court's top healers and counselors." "Good," he said, the edge in his voice finally softening. "One more thing. What exactly did it cost you to revive me?" Her gaze dropped. The ritual drained life essence from 10,000 souls. Every heartbeat, every breath, all recorded in high-definition holography. Without that sacrifice, you would have remained dead. Ethan stared, a mix of awe and sorrow in his eyes. "You did all that. For me?" "For you," she whispered. He took a slow breath. "Then I'll honor my end of the bargain. But any further, violations, and you'll regret underestimating me." Morgana inclined her head solemnly. "Agreed." Carl melted back into the shadows. "Need me to summon the notary?" Ethan tucked the hourglass into his vest. "Only one condition, Carl. Keep your nose out of our affairs." With a reluctant laugh, Carl vanished. Left alone, Queen and Resurrected Knight prepared to finalize the settlement, a pact forged in souls, shadow, and the desperate price of new life. Morgana's laughter was low and amused. "You really think I'd believe that?" Death Carl threw up his hands in exasperation. "Morgana, I swear I wouldn't do anything so reckless. If I wanted to, I'd just craft a little Liang Bing figurine, or even recreate the Apocalypse King template at full scale. Who'd ever suspect me?" She snorted, still eyeing him. "We'll see." Carl ran a hand through his hair. "Kesha's watching me like a hawk. I can't afford to be too blatant." Morgana leaned forward, the corners of her mouth curling into a sly smile. "All right, I'll make you a deal. I'll grant you your own dark plane." At her words, Carl reached into his robes and produced a small, metallic capsule. "You mean the dark plane positioning device?" Morgana took the capsule, her fingers flicking its surface. Slowly, she channeled a strand of dark energy into it, and instantly found herself peering through its lock. Instead of a simple spatial marker, she discovered a pocket dimension sealed behind hundreds of encryption wards. She frowned in astonishment. "I've never seen defenses like this. Not even the highest-ranking demons of our civilization could muster so many layers." Carl's grin was satisfied. "I anticipated your reaction. I designated the first being infused with dark energy, whether god or super soldier, as the supreme authority of that plane. You won't have to break a single seal. Just open your vision, and everything will be yours to command." With a thought, Morgana's sight pierced the final wards. Endless vaults of arcane supplies, rare ores, and raw dark matter stretched into shadowy infinity. The wealth of that hidden realm was staggering, enough to resurrect every fallen lieutenant Morgana had ever lost, to forge her demon claws anew, and to fuel dark designs far beyond their current imaginations. She turned to Death Carl, eyes alight with dark promise. "Very well, show me the way." Keep in mind that Death God Carl had already given Ethan everything he needed to bring his fallen subordinates back to life. He even supplied the materials to upgrade a fourth-generation divine body, and then to resurrect and reshape another. And remember, all of this took place in the dark plane. It looks like the chapter text itself didn't come through. Could you please paste the full text of Chapter 63 here? Once I have the original content, I'll rewrite it into polished, idiomatic English and rename Luther to Ethan, as requested. Chapter 64, trying to turn enemies into friends. Across the entire Super Seminary universe, it seemed that only Death Song Academy and, on the loftier side, the Angel Civilization had the magnanimity to grant others an entire dark realm. Morgana received the gift in silence, her satisfaction plain despite the fact that the realm was nothing more than unshaped void. Even a barren realm held promise, and that promise set her mind at ease. Death God Karl understood her perfectly. He'd reserved an unbuilt dark realm just for her. "Go on, dear niece," he urged with a sly grin. "Uncle Karl has done his part. Why not bring this realm to life?" But Morgana bristled at the gentle teasing. She fixed him with a cool stare. "Karl," she said, her voice measured, "can't we have a bit of sensible conversation?" With a theatrical shrug, Karl retorted, "Your Majesty, I'm a demon. What sort of reasonable discourse do you expect from me?" Morgana muttered an expletive under her breath, and Karl fell silent. Of course, Death God Karl knew better than to think Morgana was losing her mind. Her outburst was nothing more than a release of worried energy. They had stood side by side for centuries. He could map her moods and motivations as easily as if they were inscribed in Etcher's tome, and today she simply needed to vent. Karl, the Death God, understood Morgana's mind better than almost anyone. He spoke to her in a low, reassuring tone. "The Tauti fleet has arrived at Blue Star. As long as you remain well hidden, they won't pose a threat." Morgana's eyes narrowed. She shifted her weight impatiently. "That isn't enough, Karl. I was nearly robbed and killed once already. I don't feel safe." Karl considered her for a moment, then offered, "What if I lend you my peak beast form on Blue Star? With that power at your side, you'll be far more secure." Morgana blinked, surprised. "You still have a peak beast body tucked away?" Karl gave a faint smile. "I never said I was running out of surprises." In truth, he was more than just well-stocked. He was practically an oil field of resources, ready to spray out hundreds of possibilities at a moment's notice. He hadn't expected Morgana to squeeze every last advantage out of him, but he didn't mind. "I'll assign Snow and the Tauti warriors to awaken and reshape the crocodile god Soten," Karl continued calmly. Handing Soten over to Morgana had served two purposes: protecting her while securing the next phase of their plan, and, admittedly, he had never imagined anyone would dare challenge the Demon Queen. Now that the threat had emerged, it made perfect sense to fortify her position with the might of a god-beast. The Demon Queen's fourth-generation divine body lay in ruins, and with it her only means of escape. Yet as she fell into their grasp, Karl, the god of death, found himself baffled. He probed Ethan's aura for traces of dark plane energy, but every readout came up empty. It was as if someone had wiped all evidence of the dark plane clean, something Karl himself could do, but he had never encountered another who shared that power. "Karl, that individual from the Krypton civilization," Morgana asked, her voice tight with disbelief, "are you really telling me you can't detect any dark plane signature at all?" Karl shook his head, frustration flickering in his hollow eyes. Only now, as Morgana regained her composure and the last echoes of the battle faded, did she allow herself to set aside her aggression and turn to strategy. Ethan's arrival, and his uncanny mastery over technologies far beyond their own, threatened to upend everything they thought they knew about divine hierarchy. He had claimed no heritage here, yet he'd not only survived but assimilated the Demon Queen's fourth-generation form in record time, elevating himself instantly to the status of a top-tier research deity. Morgana weighed the implications. In the pantheon of gods, a civilization's head deity could be a scholar or a warlord, but even the mightiest head god didn't necessarily outmatch every specialized divine form. Still, Ethan's feats suggested he might stand shoulder to shoulder with them, Karl and Morgana, on equal footing. With the Demon Queen contained and this new variable in their midst, they would need a plan, and fast, if they hoped to maintain their dominion over the Dark Plane. Ethan sat at the center of the Divine Council chamber, flanked by Morgana and the Death God, Karl. A hush fell over the assembly as the great chronometer hovered above the obsidian dais, its gears ticking with a power no mere third-generation god body could match. "If one is to rise as the primordial deity of a civilization," Ethan began, voice steady, "then one must wield the civilization's supreme configuration, its ultimate expression of order and authority." He met Morgana's anxious gaze. "That status carries more weight than any king-level title. though in practice, the two often overlap. A king-level being will almost always serve as a civilization's primordial deity, but the reverse isn't guaranteed. Carl folded his skeletal hands and spoke with his trademark calm. An unknown king-level entity has appeared on Blue Star. We cannot tell whether he encountered Morgana and took something from her, or what else he might be planning. The chronometer cannot fix his location, so we're unable to probe his Dark Realm signature. Ethan frowned. Without his coordinates, there's no way to trace him through the abyssal planes or tap into his power matrix, and there is no other artifact or supercomputer, godly or mortal, that can rival the chronometer's sensitivity. Morgana leaned forward, urgency in her voice. Then what do we do, if he's hostile? Ethan's eyes glowed with resolve. We prepare. Let every watchtower on Blue Star host a guardian. We'll strengthen our wards, reinforce the leyline nexus. Any trace of king-level energy we detect will converge on. He may be hidden now, but he cannot escape forever. Silence settled again as the three deities considered the gravity of their task. The fate of an entire civilization and the honor of its primordial deity hung in the balance. What if he's still on Blue Star? Could that ruin our plan? Kaisha, she's got a far better reputation in the known universe than we do, Morgana muttered, her tone sour. They just finished decrypting and correlating every scrap of Ethan's communications. The verdict was chilling. This long undetected Kryptonian civilization must be a fringe space supergod civilization. Why its supreme deity had crossed into known space was anyone's guess, but one thing was certain. The moment it arrived, its first priority would be a full-scale survey of the universe as we know it. Unlike the inscrutable depths of fringe space, the known universe lay wide open to their instruments. With their celestial-level supercomputer, vastly superior to the old Deno 3, they could model and monitor nearly every phenomenon in real time. Yet when it came to sheer prestige, even that quantumplex paled next to the angelic civilization's standing. Morgana's eyes narrowed. Ethan can't be allowed to link up with Kaisha, or worse, befriend her god. That would blow our entire operation. She paced the command deck, every step echoing her growing unease. We'll need to keep him under close watch. Once everything is in place, the Holy Kesha's final curtain is inevitable, Morgana declared, her voice dripping with cold certainty. Death God Carl shook his head, his black cloak rippling like living shadow. No mere king, no matter how powerful, could disrupt my plans to obliterate Kesha without inside intelligence. Then am I next, once Kesha falls? Carl asked, his tone eager. A thin smile curved Morgana's lips. She harbored no real confidence in Carl's assurances. In fact, the moment she returned to Demon 1, she intended to tear her body down to its atomic framework, gene engine, neural lattice, the works, and rebuild herself anew with fourth-generation materials. Carl might swear on his dark throne that he'd done nothing to sabotage her, and her own quantum supercomputer might detect no flaws in his store, but she distrusted him all the same. Carl lifted his hands in mock humility. Your Majesty, I assure you, I wouldn't dream of betrayal. Good, Morgana sniffed. If this plan succeeds, that wretched Kesha will be gone for good. But if it fails, neither you nor I could stand against him. Carl's form shimmered as he considered her words. Very well, but if he survives us, perhaps we can turn him to our cause instead of opposing him. He believed it unlikely, and yet absolute certainty was a luxury neither of them could afford. Ethan shook his head. Morgana's destruction was hardly unprecedented. In the grand scheme of things, it isn't a deal-breaker. There are no eternal enemies when interests align, only opportunities to turn foes into allies. As the god of death, Carl preferred pragmatism over brute force. He had no desire to squander his scarce void engine squadrons or dispatch his void warriors on a vendetta. Instead, he proposed a mutually beneficial agreement. He would hand over the coveted fourth-generation divine body technology to Ethan. Carl knew the blueprints themselves were the easy part. The real challenge lay in gathering the rare materials required to bring them to life. The technology is yours, he said coolly, but you'll have to secure the components yourself. Chapter 65. The legendary Super Doomsday Kryptonian Death God. Carl was well aware that, even with the entire Kryptonian civilization at Ethan's back, forging a god-level empire in the outer reaches would be nothing short of miraculous. The outer reaches, sometimes called the unknown universe, were as vast and uncharted as the cosmos itself. Scouring them for the rare materials required would force us to send countless scouts into the void, and even then, the yield would be agonizingly slow. When Queen Morgana caught wind of Carl's proposal, she exploded with fury. "You want to negotiate with him?" she thundered, pacing before Carl's black marble throne. "After Ethan slaughtered my mother and stole my crown, there's no way I'll agree to this." Carl rose, his voice unhurried and steady. "Be calm, Queen Morgana. This is the wisest course. Ethan has no reason to attack us, and he may not even know of Kesha's Silver Wing domain. If we extend an olive branch, we stand to gain his cooperation without shedding another drop of demon blood." "You're saying we're going to lure Kesha's grandson to his death right in front of her?" Morgana's eyes glittered with interest. Of course, Ethan would know just how untouchable the angel civilization appeared, reputation so flawless that even celestial-level supercomputers confirmed it. Throughout the known universe, no one spoke of Holy Kesha's invincible Silver Wing domain, and no one dared tamper with the angel's secrets. Their dark plane data erasure technology was unrivaled. Cal the Reaper tilted his head. "Actually, it's more accurate to say we're baiting Kesha's attention." Morgana waved away his correction with a smirk. "Enough theatrics. What matters is the method. How do we trick him into dying?" She turned her gaze to Cal. "Remember, he's only just received your 4th-generation divine body enhancement. How do you propose we ensnare him now? Even if Ethan could grasp and master the technique, he still wouldn't have the raw materials for a 4th-generation divine body," Death God Carl said dryly. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Forging a 4th-generation divine body demands atomic transmutation, an exquisitely delicate and resource-hungry process. Across the known universe, only the Angel Civilization and the Death Song Academy possess enough wealth and power to produce even a handful of such materials. Morgana's eyes flickered with concern. "Do we have any of it left?" she asked. Carl shook his head. "No, I can only synthesize a fraction of what's needed, and I've already used 2 portions on you alone." Morgana pressed on, her voice tense. "Are you certain? There's nothing hidden away?" "It's gone." Carl's tone was flat. "If you'd been willing to become one of those phantom vessels, I'd have sold every last relic in my vaults to supply you, but I'm not planning to do that again." Morgana swallowed. "But if Ethan, once he obtains the materials, manages to complete his upgrade, won't that introduce even more variables into the equation?" Carl's gaze hardened. "Precisely. So don't lie to me about what you know or what you intend. If Ethan gains that power, everything changes, and not necessarily for the better." Morgana paced the dimly lit chamber, worry etched on her face. "What if he turns his back on me? What if he refuses to acknowledge our alliance?" Death Carl leaned against a towering console, his expression unreadable. "Don't worry," he said, voice calm. "I'll take care of everything." On Earth, Ethan stood before a sleek vial filled with shimmering liquid. He stared at it in awe. "Supergene complete," he whispered, heart pounding. This was no ordinary serum. The so-called doomsday cells it contained had been meticulously enhanced, and Ethan's custom-built biomass computer had woven Broly's genetic signature into the mix with perfect precision. In earlier trials, the 2 genomes simply wouldn't cooperate. Doomsday's adaptive nature would overpower Broly's mutative potential, treating it like a virus and eradicating it. But thanks to Ethan's groundbreaking supergenetic protocol, that conflict had been resolved. He allowed himself a grin. Not only had he achieved stable fusion of the 2 gene lines, his upgraded Doomsday biomass computer now outstripped even the dark matter processors he'd once relied on. With it, he could finally peer into the dark plane and harness a dark energy drive, abilities no previous supergene had ever exhibited. Neither the original prototypes nor the run-of-the-mill variants had come close to such power. Ethan drew a steadying breath. This breakthrough would change everything. As the vial's liquid pulsed softly in the ambient light, he knew the next phase of his experiment was about to begin, and that nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan reviewed the data in front of him, his mind racing with possibilities. Dark energy, he knew, could be tapped to amplify biological functions to superhuman extremes. A single punch could deliver over 1,000 tons of impact. A leap could clear 10 meters in height, and a sprint could hit 100 meters per second. This basic dark energy drive was only the beginning. By contrast, most supergenes naturally converted to light energy. The Tau T civilization, an esteemed aerospace-level society, relied on light energy barrier technology for defense. Even their most advanced warships stopped there. Only the legendary Angel fleet had managed to field dark energy shields, and some experimental vessels were rumored to use even more exotic space-time barriers. When it came to propulsion, dark energy drives were hard to come by. Far more widespread were stellar energy drives, which harnessed the fusion processes of captive stars. Close behind came pure nuclear fusion engines, then light energy systems, and so on down the line. Technically, the power quality of dark energy couldn't match the refined flow of chi, but Ethan had discovered something crucial. His body offered an extra channel to convert dark energy into both fusion power and light energy. If he could get his hands on the D-Lena research, specifically their algorithm for converting dark energy into a self-sustaining fusion reaction, he might finally generate true fusion power from dark energy alone. That breakthrough would revolutionize propulsion technology. Stellar drives would still reign supreme for large-scale travel, but imagine a personal drive compact enough to fit inside one person. He took a deep breath and activated the injector at his wrist. The supergene serum surged into his bloodstream. Pain seared through every fiber of his being, a white-hot agony as dark energy flooded his cells and began to reconfigure his very DNA. Ethan gritted his teeth, determined to endure. The future of propulsion technology, and perhaps the fate of entire civilizations, hung on what happened next. Cellular-level renewal is excruciating, especially when you possess supergenes on the scale of Doomsday or Broly. Ethan had temporarily shut down his pain receptors, but even without feeling a thing, he could see his body tearing itself apart. Ripped shreds of old flesh and pools of spent blood fell away, while fresh tissue and crimson fluid sprouted faster than the eye could follow. A raw, elemental power welled up inside him. He flexed a finger, and the air shattered with a sonic boom. His neural reflexes had accelerated to inhuman speeds, both in limb movement and mental processing, making the world appear to crawl in slow motion. Energized by this surge, he extended his biological force field. Instantly, an invisible dome rippled outward until it enveloped the entire celestial empire. "It's impressive," Ethan muttered, surveying the shimmering barrier, though still a notch below Superman's gravity-warping aura. Before today, his force field had reached only a meter from his skin. Now, this reality-distorting shield bent physical laws on an empire-wide scale, proof of just how far his power had grown. Ethan, now hailed as the legendary Super Doomsday Kryptonian, could perform feats once thought impossible. Thanks to the bioelectric foe, RC field rippling from his entire body and enveloping the planet, he could literally tow the Earth through the cosmos. Without that protective aura, even his prodigious strength would have torn the world apart rather than moved it intact. In sheer power, this Super Doomsday Kryptonian rivaled and perhaps even surpassed the famed Super Kryptonian Hale. Though Ethan didn't possess quite as many distinct abilities as Hale, what he lacked in versatility, he more than made up for with raw, unstoppable force. Chapter 66, Prime Beast Form. Ethan knew full well that, at this moment, he wasn't as strong as the Super Kryptonian Hale, but when it came to raw potential, he was leagues ahead. Even the so-called silver and golden supermen might edge him out in power right now, but only marginally. He paused mid-thought. I shouldn't say that out loud, he chided himself. In this world, uttering a boast was practically an invitation for disaster. He scanned the heavens with his supervision, an eyesight so refined it rivaled the most powerful astronomical telescope. Through that lens, he spotted the fleet of Taudi vessels emerging from the Big Bug Bridge. The Taudi civilization had long shown interest in Blue Star, dispatching scouts to size up its defenses. Ethan rubbed his chin. Had Death Carl tipped them off about him? It made sense. Once Morgana went dark and the secrets of the Dark Plane vanished, Carl would investigate, just as he had when Sumali died and she came barreling in. Ethan refused to believe the God of Death hadn't been monitoring Morgana's every transmission. If Carl knew of Morgana's disappearance, he certainly knew of Ethan's involvement and all the power he now wielded. In a few moments, he would stand face to face with both Morgana and Death Carl himself. There would be no hiding his identity or his capabilities any longer. He took a steadying breath. Whatever lay ahead, he had to be ready. The Tauti fleet, the god of death, Morgana's silent secrets, they were all pieces of the same puzzle. And Ethan intended to solve it. Ethan activated his dark plane defenses, sealing off every trace of his aura so that no one, not even Morgana with her recording magic, could pierce his secrets. Morgana watched intently, convinced she might capture something, anything, that would reveal Ethan's true power. In the end, all she and her allies gleaned was speculation. Perhaps he'd mastered a new form of energy technology. Perhaps he carried unknown super genes. None of them suspected the real truth, that Ethan still held his greatest trump card and a repertoire of powerful spells in reserve. Even if the so-called death god Carl was nothing more than an illusion, Ethan had laid every contingency for dealing with him. That was the advantage of never showing all your cards. He'd also decided to keep Tauti under close observation, wary that her volatile nature might shift in unexpected ways. And Qilin, he would keep an even closer watch on her. Ethan had no intention of letting her accidentally trigger the Shenhe sniper super gene hidden within her. In the original timeline, Qilin had suffered terribly, pouring out her very life force in battle. Her first-generation super gene had delivered feats that neither second nor third-generation abilities could match. But each time she fought, she did so on the edge of destruction. The thought of her sacrificing everything while a deserter shirked his responsibilities was too chilling for Ethan to ignore. He would not let history repeat itself. Ethan no longer resented that he hadn't been forged into steel. After all, he wasn't even iron to begin with. His only mission now was to protect Qilin. Everything else could be left to fate. He paused, considering his next move. In the super god domain, I ought to be able to recruit a handful of loyal subordinates. Thanks to his transformation magic, materials would never run short. Crafting obedient servants would be far easier for him than for most, and if he could unravel the internal design of a celestial-grade supercomputer, he could transmute them at will and begin mass production. His thoughts then turned to Hei Si, the monarch of the Sky Base, who still lingered on Blue Star. In the original timeline, she would have departed long ago, so her choice to remain here now could only mean one thing. She was here because of him. His exceptional talent and sudden rise in power naturally drew her attention. Yet Blue Star was a maelstrom of competing forces, each faction converging on the planet for its own purposes. Amid that chaos, Morgana had ipped back onto Blue Star with barely a whisper. Whatever her intentions, she was once again playing the shadows, and Ethan would need to stay one step ahead if he hoped to protect Qilin and see his plans through. Ethan's vision blurred with swirling shadows as the death god Carl's teleportation spell swept him into Morgana's throne room. When the darkness cleared, he found himself standing before Queen Morgana, flanked by a half-revived host of demons. Their bodies hovered motionless in midair, flickering between life and raw magic. At the foot of the dais, Otto dropped to one knee, bowed so low his forehead nearly kissed the cold stone floor. "Your Majesty," he cried, voice trembling. Guilt weighed on him like a physical blow, because he hadn't been here to protect the Queen. She had fallen once already. It was their failure, his failure. Morgana's pale eyes snapped open. Her crimson hair spilled over her ebony armor like spilled ink. She waved a slender hand, and the half-formed demons shuddered back into full existence. "Silence," she commanded. Then, addressing Otto, she said, "Prepare the peak beast body for Tauti. I want it delivered immediately. As for my fourth-generation divine vessel, tear it down. Every fragment will be used to reconstruct my godly form." Otto swallowed. He hesitated as he recalled the resources Morgana had already poured into resurrecting her forces, resources gifted by Carl not once but twice. This time, she refused to sacrifice living souls as raw material. Morgana had learned her lesson. If Ethan dared intrude again, she wouldn't risk it. So she chose her own divine essence for the task. "Yes, Queen," Otto replied, bowing his head and rising to his feet. As he turned to issue the orders, his heart sank. He knew Morgana's plan went further than mere reconstruction. She intended to cross-reference the newly awakened demon's dark energy signatures against the archived data from Demon Number 1. By analyzing, comparing, and refining her grasp of forbidden sorcery, she would emerge stronger and far more dangerous. The process would be painstaking and time-consuming, yet utterly vital. Handing over a single beast body was a small price to pay. Still, as Atto watched Morgana's unwavering profile, he felt a twinge of regret. In seeking to shore up her power, had they just unleashed a force they might no longer control? Only time would tell. Ethan's heart pounded as he watched the chaos unfold. Death God Karl had been adamant that Morgana, driven by her obsession with creating a super soldier, would seize control of the ultimate beast vessel the moment she compared its core data. Yet Morgana, ever cautious, ran her own diagnostics first. In an instant, she discovered the alarming truth. No one could bind the crocodile god Sotan. Even starved of energy, its primal will proved far too savage for Ethan's still immature god form. On the blood-slicked ground below, Sotan's great blade descended with inhuman ease, severing Ethan's younger brother as if cutting a melon. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Beside him, Tauti lunged forward, chanting spirit-binding runes, but Sotan shrugged off the chains like they were spun of air. "Didn't Death God Karl teach you how to command the beast vessel?" Tauti shouted, retreating to safe distance. Ethan's voice shook. "He warned me. He said Sotan's mind might have been implanted by the angels, that only the Demon Queen could rein in a spirit twisted like this." Tauti stared at him, incredulous. "Why didn't you tell me that sooner?" Ethan clenched his fists, staring down at his brother's lifeless form. If the angels had truly grafted their will onto Sotan, it was worse than simple brainwashing. Karl had known what he was unleashing, which explained why Ethan had hesitated to assume this vessel in the first place. Now, faced with the full horror of angelic tampering, he trembled at the thought of how deep that corruption might run. The alley was far more crowded than anyone had expected. The original crocodile god Sotan had been ruthless and cunning, but now, after the angel's flawed mind implant ritual, he waddled about like a harmless goofball. Whether it was the angel's waning energy, an imperfect technique, or the sheer strength of Sotan's peak beast form, their control had failed. He still ripped and swallowed his victims, of course, but his newfound silliness made him far easier to trap. A Tauti hound herded Sotan down the city's main drag, sending terrified pedestrians fleeing for their lives. A few onlookers, convinced it must be some guerrilla film promotion, even whipped out cameras. "So many snacks," Sotan crowed, only to realize he'd been running full tilt and hadn't eaten at all. He skidded to a halt in the middle of the street, his scaly chest heaving as he collapsed onto his stubby belly. The demon hunter and the Tauti closed the net swiftly. "Finish this before he recovers," Atuo barked. His eyes were hard as flint. This croc was slipperier than any they'd faced. He'd feigned near exhaustion just well enough to lure them blocks from their transport. Thank the gods there were no super warriors on Blue Star. Even a royal god or devil number 1 himself would have missed such a ploy. Now they just had to make sure Sotan didn't trick them again. Ethan hadn't seen this coming. As Atuo and Tauti closed in on him, the crocodile god Sotan was forced to surge to his feet once more, and with a roar, he unleashed a potent curse against his pursuers. Chapter 67, Chopping Melons and Vegetables. Ethan never imagined that a simple stroll through the city would land him face to face with a first-rate beast champion mysteriously dropped at his doorstep. Nor did he expect to stumble upon the Atuo sect's motley crew of demons and gluttons. Could they really be resurrecting the dead using raw energy and matter? He paused on the quiet street, eyes narrowing. His thoughts drifted to Qilin and Huang Kun, 2 key players in this unfolding mystery, and he found himself half expecting Morgana to reappear so he could finish her off once and for all. Yet, although Morgana's inner circle had resurfaced, there'd been no wave of mass disappearances across the Celestial Empire. "That can't be right," he muttered. "Morgana's resources are barely enough to raise her own lackeys. How could she pull off a resurrection of this scale? She must be using someone else as a scapegoat." Ethan shook his head in disbelief. If Morgana truly had the wealth to fuel such experiments, her demon army would dwarf the handful of revenants she currently commands. Reviving even a single subordinate gobbles up enough power to spawn hundreds of second-generation demons. and with cheaper scapegoat resurrection technology already out there, she'd have flooded the Empire long ago. What puzzled Ethan most was his own role in this. He hadn't been brought back by the Zheng dynasty. He had no grudge against Morgana or her cohorts. Yet here they were, all but daring him to uncover their secret. Something about this entire operation didn't add up, and Ethan vowed to get to the bottom of it before more innocents paid the price. Ethan materialized in an instant. Before Atuo and his cohorts could so much as draw breath, he thrust out his hand, and a jagged bolt of lightning leapt into being. In the martial world, chi can be shaped into fire, ice, or countless other elements. Through painstaking practice, Ethan had mastered its electric aspect, calling his technique the 10,000 Kingdoms Shock Palm. The lightning struck Atuo, the gluttonous demon, in the chest. The sudden heat and crackling current ripped through him, carbonizing flesh and bone in an instant. Atuo's body disintegrated in a spray of ash. But the bolt didn't stop there. It arced outward in branching tendrils, leaping from demon to Tao Ti in a devastating chain reaction that tore through the gathered fiends. A chilling crackle echoed across the battlefield. When the sound faded, Ethan stood before the crocodile god Thornton, whose massive, emerald-scaled form still reeled from the slaughter of his minions. With unflinching calm, Ethan raised his index finger. Instantly, a blade of condensed chi flared into being, humming like a lightsaber at the crocodile god's throat. Thornton's jaws snapped shut. The two adversaries faced off in dead silence, the only sound the low buzz of Ethan's luminous sword finger and the distant echoes of lightning's wrath. Swish, swish, swish! Ethan's crimson lightsaber ignited in a blur too swift for the naked eye. In less than a minute, the massive form of crocodile god Thornton was neatly sliced into dozens of segments, each piece tumbling to the obsidian floor. With a practiced motion, Ethan gathered the fragments into a containment pod, then deactivated the blade. He studied the remains with clinical interest. Kryptonian superspeed rivaled the legendary Speed Force in pure velocity, trading off a few exotic tricks for breathtaking swiftness. While the divine crocodile's power held little personal appeal, its peak beast physiology was precisely the kind of specimen Ethan needed to dissect. Understanding its genetic architecture could yield the ultimate template for his creations. At the moment, Ethan had no ready supply of supergenes he could simply clone or splice. He'd rather harvest a creature's DNA directly than spend endless hours scouring arcane gene repositories or conjuring transformation spells en masse. After all, he wasn't looking to raise ordinary pets. His subordinates had to be formidable in their own right, competitors in mystical tournaments, troubleshooters in cosmic conflicts. He built them to act independently, not as charges to babysit. Ethan wasn't like Aizen or Ewok, who personally stepped in when their underlings failed. No, he preferred to refine his designs until replacement, not rescue, became the obvious solution. With Thornton's genetic blueprint soon to be decoded, the next generation of super beings would be unstoppable. Ethan leaned back in his chair and scrolled through the latest gene reports. Truly standalone supergenes had become almost as rare as relics. The so-called second-generation variants were all but worthless, and even third-generation profiles barely made a ripple in the field. Legends like the Nuoxing War God gene or the Galaxy Power sequence, promised in the old data archives, remained dormant until someone obtained the special unlock permission. Without that key, they never lived up to their mythic reputations. But then there was the primal beast form. No engineered super gene at all, yet bristling with raw, untamed power. Its only shortfall was missing a handful of Sun Wukong-level transformations. In every other respect, it functioned as the perfect super soldier. Few in the galaxy could stand against Thornton, the so-called crocodile god, once they donned that form. If Ethan ever stumbled across something like that, he knew better than to turn away. Even if he couldn't reproduce it himself, studying its mechanisms could yield breakthroughs no simple gene lock could match. That's exactly why Rudd refused to arm his troops with crude templates, Saiyan strands, Kryptonian codices, and the like. They lacked built-in safeguards to seal off their dark plane data, and without a proper gene lock protocol, the risk of an uncontrollable data leak was far too great. In a game where power came at the cost of secrecy, there was no room for half-baked solutions. Ethan paced the observation deck, replaying every scrap of intelligence he'd gathered today. In the Super Seminary's database, research into genetic mutations off-world made one thing clear. You could never count on a predictable mutation. Even the most carefully engineered supergenes might never activate, or they might spin off into something utterly uncontrollable. And yet, today everything had changed. Atuo, Morgana, and the others have all appeared on Blue Star, he murmured to himself. But Tauti has been strangely silent. They haven't sent a single probe to test the planet's defenses. They know I'm here, but they don't know if I've left Blue Star already, and they're unwilling to risk losses until they're certain. He rubbed his temples. The sequence of events came into focus. Lena's unexpected arrival on Earth. Her activation of all latent supergenes among the population. The awakening of those genes as Jie Xiaolun and Lu Chuang clashed in the streets. Taoti's intended follow-up attack, set for the very next night. Except none of that had gone to plan. In the chaos of that gene awakening, Jie Xiaolun and Lu Chuang had vanished into the Super Seminary for advanced training. With his two greatest test subjects gone, Tauti hadn't bothered with cautious reconnaissance. Instead of probing, they had jumped straight to unleashing the crocodile god Thornton. And that brought Ethan to the latest and most dangerous twist. There were two competing theories about Thornton's release. Version 1. Tauti simply broke the ancient seals on the crocodile god himself, trusting that sheer ferocity would reduce Blue Star to rubble. Version 2. Something far more sinister was at work. Some infernal alliance between the Styx civilization's legendary gravedigger Snow and a devilish force bound to Tauti. Together, they planned to subjugate Thornton and force him into servitude. Only Morgana's personal intervention, the Whispers said, could turn the tide. She would wade into the fray and crush Thornton before he could be indoctrinated. Ethan exhaled sharply. So either Tauti recklessly unleashes Thornton and expects to win by brute strength, or they've coerced him with dark magic, and Morgana will have to finish the job. He stared out at the pale blue world below. Jie Xiaolun and Lu Chuang were training in sanctuaries beyond reach. Morgana, legendary warrior and protector, had already returned to Blue Star in secret. If Tauti's forces hesitated longer, Blue Star's defenses, but also its people, would slump into a false sense of security. Ethan tapped a sequence into his wrist console. No more waiting. If Tauti really is unleashing Thornton without a second thought, we need to be ready. And if they're experimenting with demonic coercion, Morgana will need help. He activated the protocols he'd been refining for weeks. Emergency alerts to the Super Seminary's battle units, tactical briefs for Lena's gene-modified strike teams, and above all, a clandestine comm channel to Morgana herself. Let them come, Ethan whispered. We'll meet Thornton head-on, and we'll make sure Blue Star stands, no matter which version of hell they choose to send our way. Ethan stood on the deck of the Demon One, watching in stunned silence as the Demon Warlord and the Tauti commander emerged together through the haze of battle. He remembered how the Tauti chain of command had only recently passed into demon hands, granted by Karl, the god of death himself. Yet here they were, walking side by side as if they'd been allies for centuries. Worse still, Atuo had flagrantly broken the ancient demon edict banning weapons beyond nuclear ordnance. In direct violation of that sacred law, he'd seized a simple watermelon knife and cut through the enemy ranks like butter, from bow to stern. Ethan's jaw clenched. Had it been his fault, somehow, that these two civilizations had grown so intertwined? He shivered at the thought of Morgana's reaction if she discovered one of his own men had been slaughtered by Atuo's mad charge. Just then, a voice echoed through the steel corridors of the Demon One, a roar so furious it shook the deck plates. "Fuck, bitchy! Karl, you worthless grandson!" The surviving devils froze. Jean, the only one who'd refused to chase down the crocodile god Thornton, remained aboard, pale and ashamed. None of them had seen Queen Morgana this enraged in living memory. Her fury wasn't like the cold, distant fear inspired by Holy Kesha. This was something wilder, more visceral. Even Ethan felt its weight pressing down on him. He had known terror in many forms, but this raw, merciless anger promised consequences far beyond any battlefield defeat. And somewhere deep in his chest, he knew the real reckoning was only just beginning. At the very least, Holy Kesha spared the common folk. Her fury was reserved solely for Morgana, the usurping queen. Desperate though they were, Morgana's soldiers still managed to muster a stout defense. But Ethan paid no heed to their pleas or their ranks. When he decided a life was forfeit, he struck without hesitation or remorse, devoid of any kingly dignity. Those who fought alongside Morgana now trembled at the memory of his ruthless efficiency. They had seen for themselves what a merciless sovereign could do. Even the death god, Karl, legendary for his grim detachment, had been taken aback when Ethan cleaved through the lines of Morgana's men as casually as one might slice watermelons and vegetables. Such brutality betrayed not only a lack of honor, but a complete abandonment of martial ethics. Yet, in the midst of this horror, a final contest remained. The apex beast form, Morgana's last, most fearsome weapon, had roared into existence, its power threatening to tip the scales. But it was short-lived. With a single, furious blow, Ethan shattered that monstrous shape into nothingness. And just like that, the peak of Morgana's strength was gone. Silence fell over the field. Morgana's forces, once filled with desperate hope, now wavered before a man who served neither mercy nor tradition, only his grim purpose. In the eyes of every survivor, it was clear. Ethan was no ordinary king. He was something far darker and far more dangerous. Chapter 68, Large-Scale Fog of War. Morgana's eyes burned with fury. "Karl, I can't stand this any longer. We have to destroy him." Karl, the death god, held up a gloved hand to calm her. "Morgana, please. Destroying a god isn't as simple as you think." He closed his eyes and imagined their last encounter with Ethan. Time and again, Morgana and the demon legions had tried and failed to bring him down. Ethan was nothing like the distant, seldom-seen Holy Kesha. While Kesha's power was legendary, she rarely intervened directly. Morgana, with her divine body, could hold him off for a moment at best. But Ethan fought alone, relentless and precise. He could decimate any super warrior in an instant. What hope did they have when his strikes could shatter even Morgana's immortality? Karl winced, recalling how Ethan had torn their apex beast into dozens of fragments and carried them away as trophies. That feat alone spoke volumes about his strength, perhaps even surpassing the lethal force of Holy Kesha's silver wings. The very thought made Karl's skull throb. Right now, neither he nor his legions possessed the power to stand against Ethan. They were trapped in a coming storm, overwhelmed, outmatched, and utterly powerless. "He can't possibly extract the Void Engine while Holy Kesha remains on board. It'd be suicide," the counselor warned. Karl, the god of death, tapped his long fingers against the crystalline table. He'd wasted enough time. His plan was simple: approach Ethan with an honest offer. If Ethan refused, Karl would dispatch his elite Void warriors to eliminate him in secret. Whether they could succeed was anyone's guess, hence the preference for negotiation. Until now, Ethan had slipped through Karl's grasp only because the god of death hadn't been looking. But that ended today. Karl closed his eyes, drawing on the power of the grand clock. Its cosmic gears spun through every realm, seeking Ethan's signature, and still nothing. Frustration flickered across Karl's face. He broke into a slow grin. Of course, as if he hadn't seen it coming. Ethan had upgraded himself. His biological force field now stretched over an astonishing radius, shielding him from any conventional hunt. Worse, Ethan could peer into the dark plane and bend its shadowy energies to his will. Rewriting the very fabric of that realm was as effortless to him as sipping water. Karl straightened. He adjusted the heavy cloak draped over his shoulders and steepled his fingers. "Very well, Ethan," he whispered into the void. "Let us negotiate, before you become the final game I decide to finish." Ethan had now mastered all 4 pinnacle techniques of the dark plane: observing, erasing, blocking, and even rewriting its information. Abilities of this caliber were supposed to belong exclusively to the Death Song Academy, the undisputed authority on dark plane intelligence. He's rewriting dark plane data? Karl, the god of death, felt genuine shock for the first time. He had planned to locate Ethan through a sweeping planet-wide data analysis. After all, Ethan had already proven himself untraceable. His dark alloy defenses and signal jamming had foiled every previous attempt to lock onto his unique dark plane signature. On a sparsely populated world like Blue Star, gathering each resident's dark plane imprint should have taken mere seconds. But Karl hesitated at the outset. He wasn't even sure Ethan was still on the planet. Now that hesitation was meaningless. Ethan had reached out across his entire biological force field and altered every scrap of dark plane information within it. The result: no scanner, no matter how powerful, could detect a single person inside that sphere, friend or foe. With this one feat, Ethan had effectively rewritten the rules of engagement. The greatest obstacle at the Super Seminary had been neutralized by Ethan himself. In one stroke, he wrapped the entire training grounds in an impenetrable fog of war, an arcane veil no dispelling spell could touch. Within its cloudy embrace, every student and teacher seemed to melt into the tall Gra, says, invisible to both insight eyes and true vision. Only the naked eye could occasionally catch a flicker of movement, and even that was erratic and unreliable. The angels, so used to relying on their all-seeing insight to read a person's aura, were thrown into disarray. If they couldn't discern who walked these grounds, then who could? Even Tianji King Hexi, master of celestial observation, found herself blocked. Not even she could probe the dark plane's hidden currents in this zone. She stared in stunned silence at her divination charts. It's as if all dark plane readings across the celestial dynasty have been cut off, she whispered. Could Ethan have done this? Thankfully, her dark plane communication network still buzzed with activity. Otherwise, her remote clone would have gone dark. But with every other possibility eliminated, there was only one suspect: Ethan, the newcomer who had just outmatched the seminary's toughest challenge. Is he within the Celestial Empire's domain? Hexi, Death God Karl, and Morgana studied the dark plane coverage maps intently. Karl had personally cross-checked every dark field reading from regions outside their own, and Morgana's spectral filters confirmed his findings. All the data converged on a single location under the Empire's control, China, deep within the Celestial Dynasty. Hexi leaned forward, genuine curiosity lighting her features. She'd never imagined Ethan could pull off something so extraordinary. Her spatial analysis array had utterly failed to penetrate the anomaly. Even a brute force scan yielded only one target, thanks to a baffling force field shrouding the dark plane. Attempting a deeper investigation consumed vast amounts of processing power and still turned up nothing conclusive. She'd never encountered anything like it. But that was exactly the kind of puzzle that excited scientists like Hexi. The unknown held the greatest promise for discovery. Angel Yan, equally puzzled, was already preparing to reach out to representatives of the Super Seminary for negotiations. And as if that weren't enough, astrogation reports announced the arrival of the Taudi civilization in the Chiwu star system. Angel Yan had one goal above all else: to uphold justice and shield Blue Star from further incursions by the Taudi civilization. Blue Star's leaders had petitioned to join the Order of Justice, a request the Angels would normally grant without hesitation. But Blue Star was no ordinary world. Within its borders lay a powerful Dino civilization and a legendary Super Seminary, placing them squarely under the jurisdiction of Holy Kesha's theocratic order. Holy Kesha, the divine matriarch of the order, insisted on treating every god and super warrior as an equal, so long as they came in peace. Yet she faced a thorny dilemma. On one hand, she needed to provide posts and partnerships for the bright young angels and the countless immortal veterans under her command. On the other, male gods and super warriors were vanishingly rare across the cosmos. She had weighed every option. The Liang civilization was notorious for manufacturing and trafficking its deities, an outright disqualifier. The fourth concubine was undeniably beautiful, but no angel could bind herself to another being for an eternity. The Styx civilization's only candidates were Snow and Karl, the god of death, hardly ideal ambassadors for a benevolent alliance. The god worshipped by the wandering space mercenaries lived without a home or a stable assignment. Even the so-called scumbag deity, infamous for his trickery, carried too much risk. If Holy Kesha bowed to political convenience and abandoned the very principles upon which she had founded the order, then, truly, what order would remain? Faced with such stakes, Angel Yan knew that every choice would shape not only Blue Star's fate but the very integrity of the Order of Justice itself. Angel Yan stared at the swirling anomaly overhead, her brow furrowing with suspicion. Only the Dino civilization, or perhaps the Super Seminary, had ever demonstrated technology so advanced. Though she had been present when Ethan brokered his deal with Tianji's King Hexi, she knew nothing of his true power beyond the simple fact that he was a god. A strange male god, possibly one destined to wed one of her sisters someday. That was the only impression she had of him. "Sister Yan, what should we do?" Angel Chase and Angel Moy asked in unison, their voices edged with worry. Angel Yan let out a steadying breath. She refused to believe that the Super Seminary, or the Dino civilization, would dare strike at an angel. "Relax," she said, her tone calm and assured. "They're not targeting us. Their preparations are meant for the Tauti civilization." Despite the gravity of her words, a flicker of doubt still lingered in her mind. But outwardly, she showed nothing. She was an angel, and angels did not tremble in the face of uncertainty. Chapter 69. War, the God of Death. Carl wasted no time tracking down Ethan. As the deity of demise, he ordered the insatiable Tauti civilization to unleash an indiscriminate assault on the Celestial Empire, any tactic that might force Ethan into the open. Carl had little concern for a mere blue star life form, but only a full-scale offensive could reveal whether Ethan was a mortal, a super soldier, or something beyond both. And with the Tauti's virtually endless supply of expendable troops, it was a risk-free gambit. Night fell, and the Empire's streets came alive. Lanterns glowed, markets bustled late, and music drifted from tea-houses. Despite the distant echoes of war, Ethan found a rare moment of peace. Hand in hand with Cheelin, he strolled beneath flickering lights and through winding alleys. Cheelin, uninterested in wealth or status, craved only his company. For Ethan, a self-proclaimed big boss and brilliant strategist, dedicating his days to groundbreaking research and his evenings to her side proved the perfect balance. Ethan barely registered the smooth hum of the city's multi-tiered traffic system. Its threads never lagged or interfered with the host network. Then Cheelin tugged on his sleeve, voice rising over the street noise. "Ethan, look!" He followed her gaze and saw it. A dark green helicopter cutting low across the skyline. "A chopper?" Cheelin murmured. Around them, pedestrians paused mid-step, craning their necks. No one authorized such a low flight over the urban core. It simply didn't happen. "Official business, maybe?" Ethan guessed, narrowing his eyes. Cheelin shook her head. "I don't know. Wait, do you see the weapons mounted underneath?" Ethan's pulse quickened. True enough, clusters of missile launchers and heavy cannons jutted from the belly of the aircraft. He hadn't wanted to alarm her, but everything clicked into place. The Tauti attack. The moment he'd suspected for weeks had arrived. Those monstrous invaders, the so-called gluttons, were finally testing Blue Star's super soldier program in earnest. "Cheelin, come on, move," he urged, grabbing her hand. Down the block, beams of searing light lanced from the gluttons' landing crafts. Vehicles exploded in fireballs, metal twisting and bending. Terrified pedestrians were swallowed by the chaos. "Is this an all-out invasion?" Cheelin gasped, stumbling beside him. Ethan's jaw clenched as he pulled her into a sprint. "Looks that way." Sirens wailed in the distance. Smoke curled above burning cars. Ethan felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't a drill. The city was under siege, and they were right in the eye of the storm. Together, they dashed for cover, each step echoing the terrible knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. Cheelin had been determined to fulfill her duty as a police officer, protect the civilians, and if necessary, die at the front line. But Ethan grabbed her hand and pulled her into the relative safety of an underground parking garage. "I'm not going back out there," he said, his voice low. "Besides, I think they've already called in outside support." Cheelin wrenched her hand free. "We have to evacuate them now. What are you planning? You don't even have a weapon." Before he could answer, her strength gave out. Terrified that Ethan might really charge into danger unarmed, she went limp and collapsed onto the concrete. Ethan caught her gently. "Don't worry," he said, setting her down carefully. "I've already made the arrangements." At his words, several towering figures materialized around him. Each wore gleaming golden armor and bore a pair of radiant wings, their silhouettes calling to mind the mythical golden Sagittarius. These were Ethan's ultimate guardians. Men he had engineered from Sumali's scum-class supergene, infused with the demon gene engine systems created by Atuo and others, and augmented by the peak beast physiology of crocodile god Thornton. Their defenses were legendary, Even the fiercest flame-level weapons, such as the flame sword, would shatter against them. Under the harsh fluorescent light of the parking garage, Ethan and his golden-winged soldiers stood prepared to face whatever awaited above. The fusion of Tianza and Demon gave rise to a new supergene and supergene engine system, abilities the peak beast body could never attain. With these enhancements, Ethan was able to wield Crocodile God Thornton's twin flame-level weapons. After days of meticulous study, he had unraveled their underlying technology. Yet even these fearsome blades fell short of the Angel's flame sword, which could unleash a concentrated bombardment of searing fire to obliterate a peak beast body in an instant. Crocodile God Thornton's weapons lacked that specific assault. No great loss, Ethan decided. He intended to seize the Angel's sword and reverse engineer its power. "Execute them all," he ordered, his tone cool and detached. There was no need for him to dirty his own hands against a handful of underpowered, grubby scoundrels. His golden saints, creations of an ancient Kryptonian civilization, stood rigidly before him. They knew only fragments of their past, that they had been forged by Ethan himself, and that to him they owed absolute loyalty. In perfect unison, they saluted. "At your command, my lord." Chapter 7, The Tauti Onslaught. By order of Karl, the god of death, the crackling announcement echoed through the grand chamber. "We are to annihilate every city and every civilian in China. Commence the operation immediately." King Shi-Ho of the Tauti frowned. Mass slaughter was his people's specialty, but never had Karl demanded such an instant, all-out massacre. Still, defiance was unthinkable. With a roar, Shi-Ho unleashed his advanced legions. The gluttons, bloated warriors who feasted on carnage, clamored for battle, eager to spill blood at their master's command. Across the void, the Super Seminary and the Dano civilization reeled in shock. They had long predicted a Tauti invasion of Blue Star. That was why they dispatched Delana ahead, instructing her to activate the planet's latent supergenes as soon as she arrived. In their original timeline, they'd narrowly averted disaster. But this time, the assault had begun even faster than they feared. On Blue Star itself, the recruits of Xiangbing Company were still in training. Fewer than 5 days had passed since Delana's arrival, and the final treaty with the angelic host remained unsigned. Yet here came the Tauti, crashing through every defense. Delana's expression hardened as she stared at the command display. "They've launched a full-scale invasion before we've even finalized our alliance with the Angels. How dare they?" There would be no turning back now. The war for Blue Star had begun. Delana had never really feared the Tauti. They were, after all, only a space-class civilization. Were it not for the gene-lock suppressors holding her back, she'd have eradicated them single-handedly. Still, this latest incursion finally roused both the Celestial Empire and the Super Seminary from their complacency. Fighter squadrons and ground forces poured into the fray, determined to halt the Tauti advance. But against the tide of enemy scouts and their aerial war vessels, Grand Cross dreadnoughts, swift gunboats, the Imperial defenders were hopelessly outmatched. Their losses mounted into the dozens, then the hundreds, while the Tauti pressed on, barely slowed. Then, like a beacon in the darkness, salvation appeared. 5 figures, radiant in golden armor, each brandishing a gleaming holy sword. Their wings, also burnished gold, cleaved through the sky with breathtaking speed. In moments, scout riders on hovering motorcycles found themselves sliced in two before they could even draw breath. "Angels?" Morgana whispered, eyes wide as she watched the miraculous intervention. "It's not the same. This isn't Kaisha's angel." Death Karl's gaze sharpened as he studied the 5 figures standing before them. At first glance, they might have passed for celestial beings, but nothing about them felt angelic. Least of all the enormous pair of gilded metal wings fanning out behind. "Damn," he muttered, "they're even flashier than parade floats." Morgana cursed under her breath. The golden armor gleamed so brilliantly it hurt the eyes. And Ethan, formerly known as Luther, wasn't far behind. He'd suited up in his own Sagittarius armor, every inch as ostentatious. "Flame-tier weaponry," Morgana added, voice low. "They're packing some serious firepower." Death Karl's expression turned grim as recognition flickered in his eyes. He knew exactly who these 5 were. Chapter 70, Death, God Karl Arrives. Ethan stood in the heart of Morgana's vast observation chamber, his eyes fixed on the hollow screen floating before him. Streams of data, weapon signatures, power readings, sprawled across its surface. Something about these readings felt eerily familiar, yet he couldn't place why. "Most likely," said Death God Carl, his voice deep and resonant. "They're from the Kryptonian civilization out at the edge of known space." Ethan glanced at him. Carl, the legendary harbinger of souls, had seen countless civilizations rise and fall, but he'd never been wrong when he spoke. "Kryptonians?" Ethan echoed. Carl nodded gravely. "Even super-divine cultures like Morgana's own or the Solaris Collective can't field weapons like these. The Liaeyang civilization uses stellar energy arms. Formidable, yes, but nothing like this. Outside the Angelic Concordat, no one in recorded history has deployed so many flame-level weapon systems." At Carl's words, Morgana herself stirred from the network of data streams that formed her consciousness. Her avatar's multifaceted eyes glowed as she processed Carl's assessment. "They're super gene markers. There's something almost familiar about them," she murmured, "but I can't quite pinpoint it." Morgana had always been generous with her demonic gene templates. She'd unleashed them across countless worlds, no genetic locks, no cryptic safeguards. Even her super gene synthesis engine lay open, free for any who dared to peer inside. After all, who she favored could unlock any secret, and those she disdained, well, they had no hope. Yet now, confronted with these new arrivals bearing Kryptonian flame-class armaments, Morgana's data arrays shimmered with curiosity, and perhaps the faintest glow of caution. If Death God Carl's hunch proved true, the edge-space Kryptonians had ventured far from home, and their presence here would reshape everything. Ethan shook his head. "There's really no need to bother with a gene lock. It's mostly show. Only those who've already transitioned from the old supergene system into the new supergene engine even pay it any mind. And if someone somehow got their hands on the devil gene, they'd be stymied by the sheer material requirements. Genes alone won't produce anything if you don't have the technology to synthesize the necessary compounds." He grimaced at the thought. "The major super-divine civilizations? They've long since perfected their own processes. They don't need our handful of genes or our tricks." He leaned forward, voice lowering. "Take the demon gene research, for example. It's not like we've discovered a new void engine that can mass-produce mutations. All our work is painstakingly tailored to each test subject. Morgana handles it by constantly upgrading and refining her designs. She's obsessed with forcing spontaneous mutations. Her subjects' demon genes evolve in record time. That obsession is exactly why, in the original timeline, she targeted a nuclear warhead." Ethan paused to let the implications sink in. She couldn't be bothered to mine and refine fissile materials from scratch. Instead, she planned to splice the devil gene into the bomb's core, detonate it, and let the resulting radiation trigger rapid, widespread mutation. It wasn't even an entirely new idea. Centuries ago, the first Kamigawa civilization attempted the same horrifying experiment. Chapter 7. The Empress's Random Gamble. Ethan sat alone in the dim glow of the command deck's hollow projector, absorbing the grim chronicle of the Kamigawa civilization. When the war erupted, their scientists had done more than hurl atomic bombs at the enemy. They'd harnessed supercomputers to dictate every step of the resulting mutations. No stray freaks, no wasted potential. Each blast was calibrated to sculpt legions of demon soldiers, imprinted from the ground up with ideal genetics. Yet the most dangerous force in Kamigawa's arsenal wasn't cold calculation but pure chaos, Morgana's gift of randomness. Ordinarily, nuclear detonations birthed countless malformed horrors, monstrous, twisted things with only the faintest spark of raw power. But on those rare occasions when chance favored her, a single demon would emerge unlike any other, driven by crackling dark energy, blisteringly fast, or endowed with some strange arcane talent. These anomalies became Morgana's elite, warriors so formidable she bent enemy data fields to her will and grafted their supergenes directly into her own ranks. No lengthy training, no loyalty ceremonies. Just the raw inheritance of power. Logically, the Empress should have amassed a battalion of unstoppable champions by now. Instead, every time she unleashed her new legions, they collapsed in a tide of carnage, her soldiers devoured by some unseen force. Across dozens of campaigns, Morgana tasted victory only once, and even that single triumph swallowed her entire host. Time and again, her armies vanished, as if the very fabric of reality recoiled from their existence. Then came the breakthrough. While scouring the forbidden archives of the Dark Plane, Morgana stumbled onto something wholly unexpected. The files weren't chronicling demon variants at all, but the histories of an entirely different breed of warrior. Soldiers forged not by mutation or shadow, but born of the ancient Kryptonian civilization. Beings of radiant energy and unbreakable spirit, they had weathered supernovae and cosmic winds. Now it seemed they were poised to descend upon Kamigawa with the same relentless resolve that had carried them across galaxies. Ethan leaned forward. If Morgana intended to pounce first, she'd have to tempt fate one more time, gambling on randomness to yield a demon powerful enough to stand against the Kryptonians. And if she lost, she would vanish forever, along with whatever twisted progeny she could still muster. In the hush of the command deck, Ethan realized this might be the Empire's final roll of the dice. The stakes had never been higher, and on the next explosion, the universe itself would hold its breath. Ethan had tampered with the Dark Plane's data so skillfully that neither Morgana nor Death Carl could tell the information had been altered. First, he cloaked it behind a formidable energy shield, then he re-encrypted it. Kryptonian warriors had their own advanced methods for hiding Dark Plane signatures. Even now, the traces they could recover were scant. Since they're warriors of Krypton, the next step should be straightforward, Death Carl observed. The Death God turned to Snow. Contact the Kryptonian warriors. Arrange a meeting with Ethan, the high deity of Krypton. Snow bowed his head. His own dark energy shield was legendary. In earlier battles, he had materialized behind Angel Chase and vanished again so swiftly that even Angel had been taken by surprise. Understood, Death Carl. Snow already respected the prowess of the Kryptonians. Their high deity alone had once brought Morgana, the fourth-generation queen of demonic civilization, to her knees. Even if Morgana hadn't been at full strength during that encounter, it was no small feat. Few divine beings could shatter her defenses so completely. Snow's deference was genuine. He knew they faced allies far more formidable than most. With a final nod, Snow activated his dark energy sigil and vanished, intent on summoning the Kryptonian envoy. The delicate dance of diplomacy and power was about to begin. Ethan squinted through the haze of battle and quietly reminded himself why Snow could afford to let his guard down around him. Carl's own envoy never needed to hide his power before the boy. But facing these 5 hardened Kryptonian warriors was another matter. Here, Snow could finally show a fraction of the true strength he wielded. The 5 warriors, icons of Krypton's famed legions, had already cut down countless Taudi. At their feet, the monstrous horde suddenly halted its advance and, as if on a silent command, began to flee the battlefield. "They're retreating?" one of the Kryptonians barked, surprise cracking his voice. "Retreat?" growled the lead warrior. "Our god ordered us to annihilate the app. No survivors." Before they could rally, a solitary figure materialized at the edge of their formation. Cloaked in black, a metal skull mask obscured his face. He spoke with measured courtesy. "Greetings, warriors of Krypton." The Kryptonians straightened their stances. "Who goes there?" demanded the second in command. Drawing himself up, the masked man replied, "I am called Snow, envoy of Carl, Lord of Death. I have come at his behest to parley with the Lord of Krypton." Snow paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Carl, the god of death. A murmur ran through the 5. They prided themselves on knowing the universe's major powers, Styx, the Death Song Academy, yet even they regarded Carl as near mythic, one of the few deities who commanded fear across the stars. To meet his messenger in person was both an honor and an undeniable threat. Snow's empty gaze met theirs beneath the skull mask. "My lord demands an audience. Will you guide me to him?" Snow and the other Kryptonian warriors stood in solemn formation, their eyes distant, as if recalling memories from some liminal realm. "We will petition the Lord God for guidance," one of them announced. Ethan, known to them before as Luther, led Keelan back to his refuge, though it was hardly the creature's true home. Before he could settle it inside, another warrior approached. "My Lord Carl, the god of death, wishes to speak with you." At once, Ethan understood the true motive behind the Taudi's overwhelming assault. The gods were hunting him. Inviting a full-scale invasion was the surest way for deities like Death God Carl to flush him out. Ethan knew his biological force field, which hid his presence from the dark plane, was far from infallible. If any being of sufficient power decided to locate him, they would. The simplest method, scanning the dark plane signatures of every inhabitant of Blue Star, would reveal one unreadable trace, his. That realization was exactly why Ethan had cloaked himself in an arcane fog of war. He'd never expected it to trigger such a cataclysm. Nor did he accept that great power imposed great responsibility. As far as he was concerned, he bore no guilt for refusing to reveal himself to gods or mortals. "Talk to me. What's there to discuss?" Ethan paused, weighing the possibilities. Clearly, Death God Karl had no access to solar energy. If he did, there'd be no need to enlist Pan Gen of the Blazing Sun civilization to detonate a black hole for void particles. The only other sensible explanation was that Karl needed those particles for the void engine. Chapter 71. The Divine Authority is Mine. The void engine is a force unlike any other in the universe. To appreciate its power, you must first distinguish it from the void controller. The controller is not the engine itself, but a specialized program, or weapon, designed to interface with the void engine or its mirror, the anti-void engine. Without the controller's guidance, the engine's true capabilities remain dormant. Ethan had no interest in the reputation of other worlds' void engines. What mattered to him was harnessing its effects on his own body. He wondered whether the engine's exotic energies could reshape his supergene, forcing it into a fully fused state. If that fusion succeeded, he could dispense with the doomsday biomass computer altogether and achieve a truly unified physiology. At present, his Kryptonian and doomsday genes existed side by side, enhancing each other, but never fully integrated, like steel and aluminum alloyed together. Better than either metal alone, but still far short of a next-generation superalloy, such as titanium. With the void engine's power, Ethan believed he could elevate his genetic makeup to that superalloy standard, unlocking far greater strength, resilience, and adaptability. Beyond that, he could use the engine to excavate deeper variations of the doomsday gene, ferreting out even more potent strains and sealing any weaknesses in his Kryptonian DNA. The potential advantages were staggering. There was one final benefit. Access to the void engine would render void particles virtually limitless for Ethan. He would no longer scrounge for scarce resources or ration raw power. Instead, he could draw upon the engine's inexhaustible reservoir and mold it to his will. In that moment, Ethan knew that if he could claim the void engine, he would hold not just immense power, but absolute authority over his own evolution, and, by extension, over any challenge that dared to stand in his way. The divine authority he sought would at last be his. As long as you grasp the internal structure of void particles, there's no practical limit to how many you can command. Void matter is ubiquitous, but raw void debris and true void particles are worlds apart. The sub-biological engines Holy Kesha bestowed upon Angel Yan, Angel Jui, and Angel Jixin were built from common void matter. And though formidable, they pale in comparison to engines fueled by genuine void particles. Those particles possess a level of purity and potency that outstrips any drifting remnant that's floated through the cosmos for eons. In an instant, Ethan appeared. Snow, standing among Death God Karl's attendants, bowed his head at the sudden manifestation of the prime deity of Krypton. Outwardly, he showed deference, but in his heart he served only one true master of cosmic truth, Death God Karl. Of course, Karl himself had not yet made his entrance. No sooner had that thought formed than a second figure rippled into being beside Ethan. Death God Karl stood before them, his presence as inevitable as death itself. "Greetings, esteemed prime deity of Krypton, Lord Ethan," Karl intoned, his voice calm, yet carrying the weight of countless worlds. Ethan cut straight to the chase, offering no divine pleasantries. "Enough courtesy. Why have you summoned me?" Death God, Karl's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. He had expected nothing less. Based on everything we've observed, his behavior patterns, the nuances in his speech, Ethan clearly occupies the role of a civilization god who also operates part-time as both a battle god and a scientific research god. Now, that doesn't mean the two fields are interchangeable. In theory, a scientific research god can go to war, and a battle god can dive into laboratory work. But in practice, the gap between those disciplines is huge. Take Death God Carl, for example. He wouldn't dream of picking up a sword in battle. And she, with her unrivaled talent for invention, knows her strength lies in the lab, so much so that she's engineered a clone specifically to fight on her behalf when her computing G-power is stretched thin. Yes, research gods can hold their own under the right conditions, but when they come head-to-head with true battle gods under equal footing, it's almost always the research gods who pay the price. That divide shows up in their very ways of thinking. Research gods move with calm, considered wisdom. Battle gods think and fight with blunt, straightforward force. Every so often, a high IQ battle god will combine raw power with strategic insight, but those are rare exceptions. For the most part, the lines between scientist and warrior stay drawn, and Ethan, straddling both worlds, stands out precisely because he dares to blur them. Ethan's bluntness was almost unsettling. Was he bluffing, or did he truly have no hesitation? All the while, the death god Carl observed in silence, cataloging every nuance. After all, for a deity of scientific research, information was the deadliest weapon. I've come to invite Your Majesty Ethan to join our campaign against the mightiest civilization god in the known universe, Holy Kesha, Carl announced. Ethan inclined his head once, his expression unreadable. On what terms? Carl's eyes gleamed with calculated intent. Although you've secured the technology for a fourth-generation divine body, you still lack the rare materials needed to complete it. I can provide a full set of those materials and grant you access to the fourth-generation archives locked within the Grand Clock by the Shenhe civilization, the greatest empire the universe has ever known. A moment passed as Carl weighed his words. But that alone isn't enough to win you over. Ethan's voice was calm, unwavering. Then tell me what you require, Your Majesty. Carl inclined his head, a silent acknowledgement that the true negotiation had only just begun. Ethan stood before Death Carl, his expression calm but unyielding. I want everything related to the Void, he said, ticking off his demands on one hand. Void technology and research data, Void matter and particles, the complete set of Void engines, the source code and operational programs for celestial-tier supercomputers, plus the fourth-generation divine body materials and technology you mentioned. Death Carl's eyes widened in surprise. You're asking for all of that? Are there even marginal space civilizations capable of, or interested in, Void research on that scale? Ethan met his gaze without hesitation. Yes, I need it. Carl frowned, weighing the gravity of the request. Your Majesty, Ethan, this is quite a lot to provide. After a moment's thought, he exhaled softly. Very well. Without waiting for any further discussion, Ethan turned and began to walk away. Your Majesty, please wait, Carl blurted out, astonished that Ethan would depart so abruptly. But Ethan merely kept walking. Death Carl shook his head in exasperation. Negotiating with him always felt like dealing with a cold, efficient scientist. If the deal worked, fine. If not, there was no point in prolonging the process. He hated wasting time. Still, Ethan felt no need to linger. If these demands fell through, he had other options. At worst, he would capture the Tao Te King Shi Hao and seize its mechanical void engine prototype. It might not suit biological subjects or supergene integration, but it would give him a starting point for his research. Ethan vanished in the blink of an eye. Death God. Carl's brow furrowed as he activated the Great Clock's arcane sensors, sweeping the surrounding void. But there was nothing. A massive anti-detection field had swallowed every trace of dark plane energy. In principle, Carl could have shattered such a barrier with sheer force. The Great Clock was more than capable of ripping apart any deception, but now wasn't the moment for brute power. Their plan hadn't even begun, and a direct assault or teleporting Demon Number 1 alone risked drawing St. Kesha's attention. Forcibly probing a sealed dark plane zone would only escalate the danger. Standing there, Death God Carl found himself nursing the same doubts Celestial Mechanist Hexy had voiced earlier. Ethan was resolute to a fault, utterly decisive and unflinching. If a challenge lay within his reach, he met it head-on. If not, he dismissed it without hesitation. He offered no room for negotiation, only the uncompromising force of his will. In Ethan's presence, absolute authority and dominance were the only currencies that mattered. Ethan leaned back, eyes distant, and spoke softly. I've been thinking, the Krypton civilization in the marginal space must occupy a role much like the angelic orders do within our known universe. He watched the reactions around him. That tone, absolute confidence, unshakable arrogance, the weight of divine authority, was unmistakably his own. The familiar thrill of looking down on lesser powers ran through him like fire. Death God Karl knew it well, and didn't Holy Kesha wield the very same attitude? Only Kesha masked that pride with a veneer of courtesy. Ethan made no attempt to hide his contempt. "I alone stand above all," he had declared, and he meant every word. Karl's dark eyes flickered with both admiration and caution. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that Ethan might be the one deity capable of challenging Holy Kesha's supremacy. Yet even Karl admitted the truth to himself. Opposing Kesha would be no simple matter. It would demand more than raw power. It would require cunning, alliances, and an iron resolve. When Ethan finally returned to his private chambers, the first pale light of dawn was just brushing the walls. Cheelin stirred from her bed, blinking against the brightness. Her voice came in a hesitant whisper. "Ethan, Memories of the night's tumult raced back to her. Every promise, every vow, every risk they had shared now pressed on her heart. She looked at him, trying to find the strength to say what had to be said next. Chapter 72, Exploiting Plot Loopholes. "Don't worry," Ethan said to Cheelin. "It looks like it's over." Cheelin pressed closer to him. "Are you sure?" She fished her phone out of her pocket and called her parents. Her dad's line was busy, but her mom answered on the second ring. "Cheelin, are you all right?" Her mother's voice trembled so much, Ethan could hear it perfectly without speakerphone. "I'm fine," Cheelin replied hastily. "I'm with Ethan, at his house." "Thank goodness," her mom sighed in relief. "But stay right where you are. Don't go out wandering. Your father left for duty and hasn't come back yet." Ethan let out a long breath. If Cheelin's mom felt they were safe, maybe the danger had truly passed. Cheelin tapped her phone screen. "There was no signal for a while. I tried calling earlier, but nothing registered." Her mom sounded thoughtful. "That explains why I didn't see any missed calls. Everything's been patchy ever since. Look, it's total chaos out there. Stay put until your father returns." "Understood," Cheelin said, pocketing her phone. Ethan glanced out the window at the streets below. Military convoys, emergency vehicles, and scrambling patrols. Since the Tauti civilization's massive assault on the Celestial Empire, the entire blue planet had been thrown into turmoil. Yet here, within the walls of this quiet suburban home, they'd won themselves a precious moment of calm. "Thanks for letting me stay," Cheelin whispered. Ethan offered her a reassuring smile. "You're safe here. We'll figure out our next move together." And for now, that was enough. The Celestial Empire reeled from devastating losses. In the wake of the alien invasion, every major power, from the Denor civilization to the Super God Academy, has sent condolences and dispatched teams keen to reverse engineer the invaders' technology. Even the Xiong Binglian was sent in, only to be routed. Their troops were fresh recruits with no time to train. Gi Xiaolun, for example, never even had the chance to face a tank barrage before being sent to the front. Duke Ao himself argued it was too soon to risk their super-gene warriors, but with the Empire teetering on the brink of collapse, they had no choice. Then, as mysteriously as they arrived, the Tauti civilization withdrew. Yet the Empire remains far from complacent. Everywhere, workers are racing to finish new underground fortifications and to renovate the aging air raid shelters built decades ago. The goal is simple. If the aliens come back, humanity will be ready. "Last night's events proved one thing beyond doubt," declared General Wei Feng in a blunt address to his officers. "Our army, in its current state, cannot stand against an alien force." Across the lands of the Yan dynasty, people whisper in fear. The casualties were heavy, and the memory of yesterday's bloodshed sits like a shadow over every household. Over 100 fighter planes have been lost, and with each aircraft went a skilled pilot. Yet even in the face of such devastating casualties, our aviators pressed on without hesitation. Their heroic attacks yielded little. Command had ordered them to disengage and return once their ammunition ran low, to avoid needless sacrifice, but under the enemy's relentless air interdiction, retreat proved impossible. Stripped of bullets, they plunged into flak and perished in the wreckage of their own planes. On the ground, the situation was even grimmer. Infantry units suffered losses dozens of times greater than those in the air. They laid down covering fire to shield their comrades and escort the civilian withdrawal, deliberately drawing the enemy's attention and firepower toward themselves. The cost in human life was staggering. Under these dire circumstances, the Yan dynasty could no longer afford to wait for the Dinor civilization and the Super Seminary to complete their slow training of the Xiangbing Company. Their last hope lay with the super soldiers, but that hope rang hollow when so many lives had already been sacrificed. Even the Super Seminary's negotiations with Angel Yan had stalled, with no clear path forward. Originally, they had hoped to enlist Delana, the chief deity of the Liang civilization, to mete out celestial justice against the angelic realm, yet that plan, too, now hung in doubt. The envoys of the Yan dynasty fell silent, offering nothing more than a request for time to deliberate. Their hesitation spoke volumes. They were deeply unsettled. They had no intention of surrendering their sovereignty, nor of embracing the very notion of a god, but they could not ignore the welfare of their people or the future stability of the realm. Under cover of night, Ethan slipped into the Super Seminary, cloaked by his most potent invisibility enchantment. No mortal eye could detect him. The dark plane sensors found no trace, and even his dark energy signature was concealed. This was true, undetectable invisibility. His purpose was precise, to obtain the Galaxy Force supergene data stored here. In the original Saga, Sumali had once stolen that gene sequence and injected himself with it, only to discover he could no longer synchronize with the anti-void engine, gaining nothing more than brute strength. Ethan's plan was different. If he could access the complete backup and fully crack its encryption, it would be only a matter of time before he mastered the Galaxy Force and bent the anti-void engine to his will. He also had his sights on an even rarer prize, the supergene of the No-Star War God. If the Galaxy Force supergene was backed up here, it stood to reason that the space-time rose had preserved this artifact as well. Ethan intended to leave the Super Seminary with both treasures in hand. Ethan slid the No-Star Edge Knife and the Death Star Spear into his pack. Despite their fearsome names, these two supergene artifacts were little more than transitional tools, stepping stones on the way to a true supergene engine. They packed a punch, but nothing extraordinary. Beside him, Delina froze mid-stride, her eyes narrowing as if she'd glimpsed something in the air. She waved her hand, brought her dark energy sensors online, and detected absolutely nothing. She frowned, circling in place. "I could have sworn someone was spying on me," she muttered. Ethan watched her carefully. If he could harvest even a fragment of Delina's supergene, his enhanced intellect might finally crack the genetic lock. Full access to the Heavenly Tao Tower's deepest permissions was probably out of reach, but a partial breakthrough would be enough to resurrect the old stellar drive technology. After all, Morgana's Demon Number 1 had ripped open similar locks before. Why shouldn't his supercharged brain do the same? He made up his mind. Not now. He'd rather wait until Delina was off guard, so he could extract the sample without a fierce struggle. Any premature move would only alert the Liang civilization. Ethan didn't much care about Blue Star's political niceties, but he'd given Qilin his word. Do everything possible to keep Yan Chao and the planet itself out of harm's way. With that promise in mind, he fell into step behind Delina, masking his true intentions beneath a calm facade. Ethan slipped through the Super Theological Seminary's outer defenses and ghosted into its central database. His custom biomass AI infiltrator, codenamed Chimera, had one target, Dino 3. Originally deployed as an unbreachable satellite network even Demon 1 couldn't hack, Dino 3 had since been repurposed into a ground-based supercomputer, freely accessible to Demon 1 and Morgana. Tonight, it was his turn. Chimera wormed into Dino 3's core so cleanly that not a single alarm sounded. In under a minute, Ethan had full administrative privileges. He scanned the directories. Critical research files were all encrypted. Of course, they wouldn't make Galaxia's supergenes and the War God project this easy to seize. If they had, Morgana would already have claimed them. Even Sumali, with all her insider connections, had only ever guessed at their true location. But the seminary's sprawling logic loops and hidden buffers, designed to confound intruders, had backfire. Ed, Ethan exploited an overlooked routine in the redundancy logs, peeled back the final layer of encryption, and uncovered the coordinates he'd been searching for, the Black Great Wall project base. There, buried deep beneath the desert Earth, lay the backup vault for the Galaxy Power supergenes and the secret dark alloy starship Mangdangshan. Smiling, Ethan prepared to extract every last byte of data. The real hunt was about to begin. It looks like only a single line made it through. Could you please provide the full chapter text you'd like me to rewrite? Once I have the complete passage, I'll transform it into a clear, polished English version with Ethan as the male protagonist. Chapter 73, Deciphering the Galaxy Power Supergene. After Ethan secured the intelligence dossier, he slipped into Black Wall Base under the cover of his superspeed, so swiftly and silently that he left no trace, unlike Sumali's more conspicuous breach. His objective was clear: infiltrate the Deno civilization's hidden vault and extract their backup of critical supergene data, despite the invisibility wards guarding it. Ethan paused for a moment in the dimly lit archive chamber, marveling at the foresight of these advanced societies. The Angelic Galaxy Power Coalition, the Super Seminary, and the Deno civilization had pooled their expertise to engineer unprecedented supergenes, and they had prudently stored redundant copies in case of disaster. It made perfect sense that the Deno civilization would back up flagship sequences, such as the No-Star God of War gene, but he'd expected to find Spacetime Rose's signature sequence alongside them. Its absence puzzled him. Blood sample backups for supergenes, he mused. Ingenious. Moving with practiced efficiency, Ethan located two encrypted data cores, the Galaxy Power Supergene and the No-Star God of War sequence, and extracted them from their containment slots. No sooner had he secured the drives than alarms reverberated throughout the Super Seminary's command center. "What's happening?" an operator cried. "The Galaxy Power Supergene files are offline, and the God of War backup is gone." General Dukow stormed in, eyes blazing. "They've stolen our most valuable backups," he roared. "We invested years of research, and only the Supergene engine's rare materials allowed us to produce those copies. Without them, even our living exemplars, Gei Xiaolun and Liu Chuang, can't regenerate the data." As sirens wailed and security teams mobilized, Ethan vanished into the facility's shadowy corridors, his mission accomplished, and a new chapter in the struggle for supergene supremacy was about to begin. Ethan frowned, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not sure. This level of secrecy is strictly internal. We're not privy to how it really works." Lianfeng stared at him, disbelief etched on his face. He, too, was stunned. Their sect had never gone toe-to-toe with ultra-divine civilizations like the Angelic Order, the Demonic Dominion, or the Necro Song Academy. They had no idea that breaching a supercomputer could be as effortless as taking a sip of water. In the original timeline, a powerhouse like the Liang Empire had sealed itself off from the outside world, playing a long game of intrigue and alliance, only to grow complacent under the dazzling glare of its own sun. When more advanced adversaries struck, the empire fell in a heartbeat. That was the perilous reality of the Grand Theological Institute. Fall one step behind, and you lost everything: your assets, your secrets, even your era. From Lianfeng's perspective, simply safeguarding the supergene samples and wiping all records of Deno 3 from the quantum core should have been enough. They never imagined that, in an instant, it could vanish, and with it, all trace of their greatest breakthrough. What made matters worse was that they lacked anything like the Angelic Order's Eye of Insight, a Dark Realm surveillance tool capable of intercepting even the most hidden transmissions. Their only line of sight was conventional satellite feeds and live stream monitoring, hardly adequate when someone was determined to slip past every screen and firewall. Ethan exchanged a grim look with Lianfeng. They both knew it. In a world where divine might equaled supreme technology, even a moment's lapse could spell total ruin. And now, with Deno 3, and the supercomputer that powered it vanished without a trace, their fate hung in the balance. The technological chasm between them was staggering, comparable to primitive humans facing off against an interstellar war game. If the Angels hadn't had the Yan dynasty's Dark Plane archives tampered with, they would already know about the loss of the Galaxy Power supergene, and the revelation would send shocks, quaves through heaven's ranks. Few of the lower angels grasped the true might of the galaxy power, but Angel Yan understood all too well. Without warning, the bioforce barrier cloaking Yan Chao flickered and vanished. Now, anyone with the right skill could access the Dark Plane's data. A voice purred through the shadows. Since we forced him out once, we can do it again. Let Tao Ti keep probing. At that moment, Morgana was conferring with the god of death, Karl, when Demon No. One burst in with urgent news. The Dark Plane files were readable again. Karl's grim expression told Morgana he'd already spotted the breach. He's left Blue Star? They whispered to each other, suspicion in their eyes. A quick scan confirmed their fear. Morgana's lips tightened. That means my backup plan, luring him into our trap, is blown. Ethan's Shadow Realm signature should have been gone, but it wasn't. Every soul on Blue Star could now be read through the Shadow Realm, and no presence remained unread. On paper, the young man had left the planet. In reality, Death God Karl doubted it. Ethan had already shown he could tamper with the Shadow Realm's records. He could rewrite his own trace. If he'd simply departed, his signature would have vanished. Instead, Karl suspected he was still here, masking himself among Blue Star's inhabitants. It made sense. If Ethan remained in the open, Yan Chao, and through him, the dreaded Tao Ti, would zero in on him again. By hiding his aura in the Shadow Realm, Ethan could oversee Blue Star without drawing attention, or so he thought. After all, Blue Star held little value for him except for one promise, the Cheelan's safety. Karl murmured to himself, then the plan goes ahead as we agreed. He chose not to share his suspicions with Morgana. It wasn't because he wanted her to journey to the Thunder Realm unawares. It was simply that if she knew Ethan still lingered on Blue Star, she would protest. Even his oath to protect her wouldn't override her fear, especially in her current state. Morgana had dismantled her divine essence, piece by piece, and refashioned her body from the raw components of divinity itself. The new form was powerful, yes, but also fragile. If she learned the full scope of Ethan's subterfuge, she might refuse to step foot on Blue Star again. And so, with no word wasted, Karl set the wheels in motion. Blue Star's fate and the safety of its most precious guardian would hinge on the next moves of gods and mortals alike. Ethan hadn't done anything overt, only Morgana's attitude toward him had changed. Now that he existed solely as a spiritual form, the warmth of physical sensation was gone, and even Karl, the god of death, found Ethan's lingering attachment increasingly abstract. Still, that very fixation hinted at one thing: their plan might yet succeed. Morgana reviewed the output of her supercomputer and reached a clear conclusion. Blue Star held little lasting value for Ethan, and the chance he would stay there to pursue Cheelan was vanishingly small. No simulation, divine or civilizational, had ever rated his likelihood of lingering on Blue Star as anything but negligible. Their earlier projections had fallen victim to inertia and a lack of hard data. Even Karl, who knew Ethan could rewrite information across the Dark Plane, could only speculate that the young man might still be on Blue Star. It's improbable he'll remain, Morgana said, but we can't take any chances. I'll send Tao Ti to shadow him and, if necessary, steer his actions. Karl nodded in agreement. Make it so. Meanwhile, on Blue Star itself, Ethan had no time for divine maneuvering. Freshly infused with the galaxy power supergene, he was already engrossed in unraveling its secrets. Ethan stared at the crystalline artifact hovering before him, an object that represented the Super Seminary's highest technological achievement. In theory, it should grant both void and anvoid abilities, exactly what he needed. The involvement of the god of war of the no-star sector, he realized, had been nothing more than a fortunate coincidence. He tapped the surface of the sphere, and a cascade of data streams appeared in his mind. The power of the galaxy, he whispered, astonished. Encrypted at multiple levels, Super Seminary standard, Dinor civilization protocols, even angelic council ciphers, this is overkill. After his initial breach, the defenses tightened again, and he hit a wall. Such complex encryption would challenge any supergene, but that was why Ethan existed. Thanks to his absurdly enhanced brain, he didn't need a 70,000-ton hydrogen reactor like other celestial-grade supercomputers. A few sunbeams were enough to power his neural processes. On darker days, the constant gas emissions from his body and the boundless energy of his doomsday gene sustained him. Drawing on that limitless reservoir, Ethan dove back into the cipher, his consciousness weaving through layer upon layer of gene locks and privilege protocols. Bit by bit, he forced the power of the galaxy to reveal its secrets. These access rights can't be unlocked without the consent of both the Angel civilization and the Dinor civilization. Some say Pangen, fearing that the solar light might fall into the hands of death god Karl, actually approached Karl in person to negotiate, though that remains nothing more than rumor. What we do know is that Angel Jichin, one of the Angel civilization's premier bioengineered warriors, had his angelic genome cracked by death god Karl, who then devised a genetic strike function specifically to neutralize angelic genes. And compared to that, harnessing galaxy power is an even greater challenge, orders of magnitude more complex. Chapter 74, Sneak Attack. Decrypting the power of the galaxy. Ethan's superbrain hummed as it ran through thousands of calculations in the blink of an eye. Ever since he acquired Galvatron, he had devoted himself to mastering its knowledge. Opportunities to grow were sacred to him, something Karl, the god of death, still found baffling. On one hand, Ethan adhered fiercely to his own methods and thought patterns. On the other, he willingly absorbed Galvatron's scientific rigor and computational logic. To an outsider, juggling two entirely different modes of thinking at once would seem contradictory. But with a superbrain equipped to handle multiple intelligent processes simultaneously, it was as if he carried an internal AI system. No conflict arose. The two frameworks coexisted seamlessly. Decryption complete, the superbrain announced. Initial unlock of galactic power confirmed. This breakthrough was precisely the step Ji Xiaolun had failed to achieve, until now. Through Ethan's intervention, the latent angelic gene within the galaxy power had finally been activated. Along with it came a trace of Void Strike ability. In the original scheme, Ji Xiaolun's Void Strike was known as Silence, an anti-void technique so profound it could overturn the universe's laws of energy and dark energy conservation. Ethan paused, letting the implications sink in. With the galaxy's power unlocked and Silence stirring at his command, a new chapter in their struggle was about to begin, one that no enemy would see coming. Ethan watched the progress bar flash past 100% and released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The system was unlocked, but even at full power, it still fell short of Ge Xiaolun's Void Controller Hero Core. Undeterred, he dove into the next challenge, the permissions set up by the Super Seminary. Rumor had it these clearances were tougher to crack than those assigned to the Angels themselves. Yet by the time a single day had passed, Ethan had them open too. He leaned back in his chair, eyes glittering with excitement. This superbrain, it's insane. Hook it up to any supercomputer, and it'll outperform every machine I know. I wonder how it measures up to the Great Clock. As he spoke, the interface blinked again, announcing another hidden tier of authority. Did the space principal or Dinghai slip this in? With deft keystrokes, Ethan decrypted the new level. Now he wielded galaxy-grade anti-void power. But without a true void controller, he couldn't redefine matter the way Ge Xiaolun's enhanced version could, and that precise talent was exactly what he needed most. Everything else, shaping space, rewriting cosmic laws, even bending energy conservation, was secondary until he mastered matter itself. Ethan slipped through the half-lit corridor of his hidden laboratory, wires snaking across gleaming steel panels like restless serpents. He paused before a hollow screen flickering with genetic schematics, his Kryptonian, Doomsday, and Broly sequences laid bare in pulsing neon. He had come to one inescapable conclusion. Only by defining and reshaping the very fabric of matter could he unlock, refine, and ultimately master these fused genomes. He muttered to himself, "The so-called king of gluttony roars and rages, but I will still him." Tonight, if he didn't act against Angel Yan and her allies, his only hope lay in a gamble, letting King Tao-Ti absorb the Void Engine, study its power, then reverse engineer a controller of his own. It wasn't impossible. After all, Ethan had already driven the Tao-Ti back, destroying over 80% of their numbers. Shihao, the Tao-Ti monarch, might retreat to Karl, the death god, seeking an upgrade. Or perhaps he'd simply be too cowed to return. Ethan replayed the strategy in his mind. Ambush Angel Yan, kill her, force activate her secondary bioengine, then resurrect her under controlled conditions. At that point, he could pry open every secret of her void capabilities. Even if she came back to life, no one would suspect tampering with the Dark Plane data exclave. Possibly, Archangel Kesha, and Kesha's detection methods weren't infallible. He swallowed hard at his own callousness. This feels horrible, he admitted to the empty hallway, but it's the only way. Brushing aside his momentary shame, Ethan traced Angel Yan's energy signature to a side chamber where she stood examining star charts. He'd never claimed to be a hero. Why else had he lured Broly into a trap? Tonight, he would have to lean into his darker instincts if he wanted to stay steps ahead of gods and monsters alike. Ethan didn't care much as long as it served his own ends. "I'll help you from now on," he said coolly. Across from him, Angel Yan still looked as if she had no idea what to expect. Ethan knew he couldn't risk a surprise attack or try to mask or alter his Dark Plane signature, because the moment he did, she'd alert Angel Chase and the others. Instead, he spoke plainly. "I see Angel Chase and Angel Moy are here as well, two secondary biological engines." In the next instant, he shifted into his battle form. Black tactical armor snapped into place over his lean frame, and a pair of enormous ebony wings unfurled from his back. In his hand, a blade of dark alloy materialized, its surface shimmering with living shadow. Angel Yan's eyes widened. "Who?" she began, but her question died on her lips. A wave of oppressive dark energy rolled outward from Ethan, and Angel Yan, Angel Chase, and Angel Moy all froze, stunned by the malevolence radiating from him. Then, with a sudden, silent motion, Ethan raised his shadow-forged sword and brought it down in a devastating arc toward Angel Yan. The air crackled as steel met celestial light, and the battle was joined. Angel Yan stood her ground without a trace of fear, even though her adversary was a third-generation god whose strength outmatched her own. As a demigoddess, she could tap into the Queen Kesha's sacred archive for a computational boost, enough to meet the god's power head-on. In an instant, sparks flew everywhere. Her vision narrowed as the dark-winged god accelerated, breaking through the barrier of her flaming sword. With a single brutal strike, he cleaved through her Suyin armor, nearly bisecting her torso. Angel Yan's heart thundered in her chest. If Angel Chase and Angel Moy hadn't intervened at that critical moment, driving their own blades of fire against the god's weapon, she would have died on the spot. Even now, the wound was grievous. Without the divine body's rapid healing grace, she could only staunch the bleeding and cling to life. Meanwhile, Angel Chase and Angel Moy stood back to back, their flaming swords whirling in perfect synchronization. Dang! 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 Each clash of steel rang out as their blades shattered the god's dark alloy sword into jagged fragments. Beneath the relentless heat and light of their assault, the Darkwing god staggered, on the brink of collapse. Angel Yan gritted her teeth, drawing on every last reserve of strength. She raised her sword once more, flames crackling along its edge. The battle was far from over, but with her allies at her side, and the power of Queen Kesha's sacred archive fueling her resolve, she refused to yield. Ethan's twin swords of dark alloy materialized in his hands. In the next instant, he was gone, moving so fast that his blades sliced through the angel's afterimages before any of them could react. With terrifying precision, his first sword drove through Angel Chase's chest, pinning him, lifeless, to the marble wall. His second blade was barely in motion when Ethan pivoted, delivering a bone-shattering kick that sent Angel Moy hurtling into the stone facade. She slumped to the ground, every breath a torment as crushed ribs and shattered organs locked her body in unending agony. Ethan bent to retrieve the flaming greatsword discarded at his feet. The roaring flame reflected in his obsidian eyes as he straightened and fixed his gaze on Angel Yan, who stood frozen in shock. "Sister Yan," he murmured, voice low and unyielding. Behind Yan, Angel Zui fought to rise. Her own dark alloy blade jutted from her side, and the glow of her resurrected armor pulsed faintly, a promise of revival if only she could haul the weapon free. Strength failed her, though. She pitched forward, temporarily felled by her grievous wound. Angel Yan's golden eyes darted between the fallen. In a desperate surge, she linked with the celestial archive, transmitting every brutal detail to the holy vault of knowledge. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Before she could finish, Ethan swung the flaming sword in a single, fluid motion. The blade's blaze cut through the chill night air, and through Angel Yan's heart. Her pupils shrank in horror as the cold grip of death closed around her. Powerless, numb, she watched the flames gutter in her chest. Her eyelids fluttered, grew heavy, and finally closed. When the final light faded, the courtyard lay silent, but for the hiss of embers. Ethan stood alone amid the wreckage, his black wings unfolding like the herald of a new, darker dawn. Ethan drew the flame sword and carefully secured Angel Zhui and Angel Yan for further study. It was too risky to linger. With Holy Kesha's power, she could rip open a wormhole at any moment. Yet his worry proved unfounded. Instead of Kesha, a clone of Tianji King Hexi emerged from the void. Even if Holy Kesha had tried to appear, it would have been futile. She'd need to marshal the extinguished energy of hundreds of stars in a single breath to span the gulf from the Angel Nebula to the Chiwu star system in the Milky Way. To her, the Milky Way was nothing more than a remote backwater, while the Angel Nebula and the Tiandao system of the Liang civilization were vast galaxies rivaling its size, distances too immense to traverse on a whim. Chapter 75, Void Technology Acquired. Holy Kesha's mind raced as she remembered the old demon on Blue Star. He'd left behind a stubborn clone that refused to budge. Now that the secret was unearthed, she had no choice but to investigate further, and that inevitably drew He-She into the tangled web of Kryptonian affairs. After receiving Angel Yan's urgent plea for assistance and the detailed intelligence she'd gathered, the supercomputer weighed the options and pinpointed the clone's exact coordinates. It immediately alerted He-She, who wasted no time deploying herself to the scene. Ethan was sprinting across the rocky outcrop when a sudden presence materialized ahead of him. Had he not been alert enough to skid to a halt, he would have crashed straight into her. "The tomboy's apprentice is under attack," He-She announced, scanning the horizon with laser focus. Ethan's heart pounded. He-She knew full well that Angel Zhui and Angel Yan were effectively immortal. Any harm done to them could be reversed, but one name puzzled her. Angel Moi. Why had the perpetrator chosen to seize only Angel Zhui and Angel Yan, leaving Angel Moi behind? What made those two so special? As He-She contemplated the mystery, her mind leapt to the sub-biological engine she'd studied at the highest echelon of Kryptonian research. From that vantage point, she'd learned to spot the galaxy's most coveted assets. But she never would have guessed that this shadowy figure was after angelic genes. It seemed absurd. Securing Angel Zhui and Angel Yan's genetic material, even for a powerful entity, was hardly worth risking the wrath of an entire angel civilization. Yet the evidence lay before them. He-She straightened, determination flashing in her eyes. "Whatever they're after," she said, "we're not letting them get away with it." Ethan stared at the holoscreen, running through the Dark Plane's latest intelligence. His pulse quickened. "It isn't the Godmakers," he muttered. "They're too cautious to pull something this bold. No, it has to be the Styx civilization's Death Song Academy." Behind him, the angel Cassiel, known informally as Holy Kesha, nodded without surprise. "Scout, we've got a serious problem. Your apprentice has gone missing." Ethan's heart tightened. "What about Angel Moi?" "Critically wounded and barely conscious. We managed to stabilize him, but he's not out of the woods." Cassiel's tone grew colder. As for Angels Yan and Zhui, Ethan held his breath. "They're dead. Their bodies have been taken." A surge of anger flared in Ethan's chest. "Taken? When they were still alive, I bet. They want those sub-biological engines." Cassiel's eyes hardened. "Exactly, and only one being in the known universe would dare and have the power to do this. Death God Carl." Ethan pressed his lips together. "That fanatic. He's the only one who could snatch two angels equipped with sub-bio engines without leaving a trace." "We can't stall," Cassiel said. "He moves too fast." Ethan sighed. "A direct strike on the Death Song Academy would be an act of war. Without solid evidence, the galaxy will condemn us." Cassiel folded his arms. "We don't need the usual channels. We go in now, before Carl can disappear with our people and their engines." Ethan met Cassiel's gaze, resolve settling over him. "All right, let's finish this, once and for all." He shut down the holoscreen and strode toward the exit. Time was running out. Sacred Kesha slammed her fist down on the obsidian table of the council chamber. "Two angels have vanished. We'll start our search here at Death Song Academy, and if that fails, we'll scour the entire known universe." Her advisor rolled his eyes. You and your theatrics, tomboy. If you keep this up, I'll have to track you down in Whirling myself. Try it, Kesha shot back with a grin. See if I care. In a hidden lab far beneath the academy, Ethan paid their bickering no mind. Before him stood two angels, Zui and Yan, ensnared in containment fields, their divine auras pulsing faintly. He should have felt reverence, or at least awe. Instead, his mind was achingly clear. When had he grown so immune to their beauty and power? A wry smile crossed his lips. Enough distractions. Time to work. Ethan engaged his hyper-accelerated intellect. First, he downloaded every scrap of data on the Angels' dark plane signatures. Then he ran a full analysis of their super gene engines. According to legend, the so-called sub-biological engine lay hidden somewhere within their dimensional core. As suspected, it was densely encrypted inside their dark plane, yet not for long. While scholars argued over whether the sub-biological engine and the void engine were distinct or identical, Ethan's scans revealed they were one and the same, known by different names. He isolated the fractal key, reconstructed the energy matrix, and overlaid it on his neural interface. Decrypting galactic-scale power took seconds. Extracting the sub-biological engine's blueprints took less. His display flickered, then stabilized on the final schematic. Got it, he murmured. The void engine. He initiated the copy sequence. Within moments, Angel Yan's sub-biological engine, her private cosmic core, had been fully replicated and stored in Ethan's encrypted archive. Leaning back, he allowed himself a single satisfied breath. With this data in hand, the true scope of the universe, its raw power, its hidden mechanics, was his to command. And the search party out there still hadn't the faintest clue where to look. Ethan finished dissecting the schematics and was ready to reverse engineer the void engine for mass production. As he'd anticipated, however, the sub-biological prototype ran at an extremely low frequency. In the original timeline, Angel Jixin nearly lost her duel with Death Karl's Void Warrior, not just because her power reserves were drained, but because the void engine she used was constructed from bulk void matter rather than finely tuned void particles. Determined to avoid the same fate, Ethan turned his attention to the legendary Void Controller, a rare device that fuses void and anti-void capabilities into a single, cohesive program. According to the canonical account, this controller was unrivaled in power, capable of manipulating the very fabric of the void. Next on Ethan's agenda was the flaming sword he'd inherited from Angels Yan and Juai. In the original saga, Angel Yan's sub-biological engine had been too unstable and frankly too intimidated to reanimate her own form with Ethan standing by, so she never attempted a resurrection. The so-called flame-class weapons, like the Angel's flame sword and the crocodile god Sotin's darts, are engineered to absorb stellar energy, essentially light, much as supergenes do. By channeling this energy, they amplify their destructive potential to levels high enough to pierce even the toughest super soldier defenses and deliver a truly lethal strike. Ethan stood before the armory's holographic display, absorbing every line of data about the weapon classes at his disposal. Though they all looked like ordinary blades, firearms, or heavy ordnance, each hid a radical piece of battlefield technology. Flame-class weapons. At first glance, flame-class arms seemed no more than weapon-shaped supercomputers, but in truth, they channeled focused photonic energy to amplify every strike or shot to devastating effect. Against a standard soldier, a single blow could vaporize armor. Even enhanced super soldiers, whose bodies were reinforced down to the molecular level, found themselves hard-pressed to withstand the searing output. Flame-class weapons didn't merely hit harder. They overloaded their target swing, defense matrices, with bursts of high-intensity light energy, shattering biological and cybernetic safeguards alike. God-killing weapons. Even more dangerous were the so-called God-killing weapons, artifacts like General Lu Chuang's No-Star War God Axe and the silver wings wielded by the legendary Holy Kesha. These arms also drew their power from photonic sources, but they operated on a radically different principle. At the moment of contact, their blades generated a tiny anti-dark singularity that emitted delta radiation waves, an effect akin to infinite energy absorption. In practice, a god-killing weapon didn't just tear through super soldier armor, it attacked their genetic enhancements at the source, collapsing defensive protocols from the inside out. Facing one of these weapons was to risk your very gene-driven survival systems. Void weapons. Beyond even those lay the Void-class armaments, instruments of near-mythic potency. Take, for instance, Guy Shaolin's Galaxy Greatsword. Its core houses a controlled micro-black hole, able to slice through space-time itself. Or consider the so-called Angel's sub-biological engine, a living biomechanical cannon that fires streams of zero-point vacuum energy. Void weapons could create tears in reality, ignore conventional physics, and render any known form of defense utterly meaningless. Ethan's eyes flicked over the final readout. Each class represented a quantum leap in military lethality, and each demanded respect. As he slotted his choice into his combat harness, he knew that when the order came, lives would hang in the balance, not just of marksmanship or strength, but of mastering these uncanny, almost sentient machines of war. Ethan understood at once that void weapons were in a completely different league from even the deadliest God-killing arms. God-killing arms strike at your genetic code. They're like swinging a sledgehammer at a computer's case. If the chassis is thick, you have to swing harder. Void weapons, on the other hand, attack at the conceptual level. It's like injecting a malicious virus directly into the operating system. No matter how bulletproof the shell, the system simply collapses from within. Once a void weapon unravels a super soldier's enhanced gene network, that soldier, no matter how formidable, becomes as fragile as any ordinary human. Control over his entire physiology instantly shifts to the attacker. Armed with the sub-biological core he'd claimed for himself, Ethan banished Angel Yan and Angel Chase into the void of space. Yet mere moments later, both reappeared, resurrected by their own cores. Angel Yan's sub-biological engine flared to life, elevating her beyond mere superhuman strength into something approaching divinity. Ethan was no stranger to this sensation. The moment he was resurrected, he swept his gaze across his surroundings. "Sister Yan, are you all right?" he asked urgently, turning to Angel Yan. Chapter 76, Super Gene Rewriting Function. Ethan already possessed the blueprint for a void controller. Its architecture had been revealed earlier in his journey. All he needed now was a spark of inspiration, the biological engine he developed, and the galaxy's power source, which had unlocked nearly every system permission. With those in place, he could build his own void controller. But instead of integrating it directly into himself, he chose to create a void warrior, a living weapon infused with both the Galactic Force supergene and a fully functional void controller. When designing the void controller's programming, Ethan went beyond the basics. He added a specialized anti-void protocol that taps into the galaxy's power field. Upon detecting void energy, it automatically activates a countermeasure. In its sub-engine form, when deployed in smaller constructs, the same anti-void protocol kicks in, ensuring protection at any scale. On top of these defenses, Ethan programmed a suite of intermediate-level abilities. Molecular Definition Matrix precisely analyzes and restructures matter at the subatomic level. Conceptual Rewriter alters an opponent's fundamental perceptions and strategies mid-battle. Psychic Strike delivers a focused mental assault, disrupting enemy cognition. Void Radiation Barrage projects concentrated void energy to devastate opponents. Gene Rewriting Function manipulates the target's genetic code, rewriting traits or disabling biological functions. Together, these subroutines make the void controller astonishingly versatile. With enough creativity, a wielder can deploy them in countless combinations, whether to assault raw power, rewrite an enemy's very DNA, or reconfigure reality itself. Though direct genetic attacks can be brutal, it's the gene rewriting capability that truly sets Ethan's creation apart, offering surgical precision where brute force would fall short. The breakthrough came when the Void Warrior, who'd once battled Angel Burning Heart, demonstrated the full power of the intermediate definition compound and gene rewriting interface. By reprogramming the super gene templates of both the Destar Gun and Angel Burning Heart, he proved the system worked, and Ethan seized the chance to define his own supergene blueprint alongside him. The results exceeded every expectation. Ethan's theory was spot on. The process amplified his Doomsday, Kryptonian, and Broly genes all at once. In the entire Super Seminary, nothing held greater value. He could literally feel raw power flooding his body. Even his Doomsday biomass computer had transformed, upgraded now to what looked like a quasi-fourth-generation core, or perhaps a brand-new branch of fourth-generation divine body, one that leaned toward a primal, almost bestial form. The long-standing flaws in his Kryptonian lineage were gone too. He'd speculated correctly that those genes had originally been engineered for pure combat, stripped of fear and other unnecessary emotions, so that only fighting efficiency remained. Now, refined at the molecular level, they were perfectly owned for the battles to come. Ethan returned to the source data and began repairing the deleted gene segments. In a single second, he ran hundreds of millions of simulated mutations, charting every possible pathway and rewriting the supergene sequences from scratch. Doomsday's genome, so many fragments were simply wiped out, he muttered to himself. It was meant as a safeguard. Letting an ancient doomsday arise wouldn't be prevention, it'd be a universe-ending weapon. He studied the partially restored sequence and realized it had hit its ceiling. No further repairs were possible without a more powerful void engine. Only by building an upgraded engine could he overwrite the supergene beyond its current limits. With that in mind, Ethan deactivated the Void Warrior unit and instructed it to perform a complete analysis of its own supergene structure. Armed with that data, he could refine his rewriting algorithms and perfect the new code. And once the upgrade was done, he wouldn't abandon the Void Warrior. Its capabilities would be crucial. Still, another, and far more daring option tugged at his thoughts. The highest security protocol that would merge his consciousness with the Void Warrior itself. By becoming a Void Warrior, he'd automatically unlock the final authority level. But meddling directly with galactic power at that scale carried unpredictable dangers. That ultimate clearance was notoriously hard to obtain and even harder to survive. Weighing the risks, Ethan reluctantly decided to postpone that path and focus for now on enhancing the Void engine. Ethan had already worked out the blueprint for a Void controller. Now the only tasks left were to harvest enough Void particles, subject them to rigorous analysis, and then build a high-frequency Void engine. With that engine in hand, he would finally be able to rewrite his own supergene from the ground up. Ancient civilizations left behind the key raw material, residue from black holes they once bombarded. This void matter could overturn the usual conservation of energy and bend the laws of physics, though it still respected the conservation of mass. Lower-tier void engines might tweak the air's composition so targets simply vanished or reprogram a person's genetic blockade to disable their defenses. The most advanced models went further. They could amplify the very concept of energy to magnify attacks or shatter the most formidable cross-barrier shields. Ethan's plan was to equip his team with both void engines and god-slaying weapons. Liu Chuang's legendary axe was capable of obliterating stars, while Ge Xiaolun's void sword, rumored to house an even more sophisticated void engine, could no doubt slice straight through any cosmic defense. Once these armaments were in place, his squad would be virtually unstoppable. Now all that remained was to procure those elusive void particles, and the real work would begin. The Styx model of the Void engine and the Angel's biological version are almost certainly both advanced iterations of the same core Styx design. After all, Death God Karl has been studying that engine for ages, with Holy Kesha and Tianji King Hexi hot on his heels, so their improvements make sense. But the Kamigawa variant, recovered from the Kamigawa civilization's Super Seminary, may be the most promising of all. Even though it, too, is built from void matter, its underlying technology is almost certainly more refined than anything Karl or the Angels have produced. Of course, Ge Xiaolun has no idea how to tap that potential, nor does she have the right materials to install it. The only alloy she had on hand was a cheap, dark composite, and Huaye shattered it with a single strike. With caches of genuine Super Seminary relics out there, it's no wonder so many powerful figures are converging on that site. Ethan didn't linger over the War God's supergene for long. His superbrain had already unlocked galaxy-scale power. Grafting in another pure War God's gene would be redundant. And in any case, since his own supergene had just undergone a fresh upgrade in evolution, his superbrain had become even more formidable than before. Ethan perched on the edge of the observation deck, replaying the data in his mind. Without his own biocomputer interface, he couldn't properly sense the dark plane or channel its energy, but with the interface online, he could detonate matter on a scale rivaling a star's dark energy core. The strides he'd made in neural evolution were far more profound than any Kryptonian had anticipated. Still, another question nagged at him. How did void radiation alter Kryptonian DNA? The mutations were undeniable, but did they mirror the effects of blue sunlight, or the multi-spectrum cosmic bombardment that had transformed Super Kryptonian hail? Ethan didn't want to gamble with his own genome and risk becoming something unrecognizable. He made a mental note to isolate and study those gene changes later, under controlled conditions. For now, he had pressing business back at the Super Seminary. When he arrived, he found Liu Chuang and Ge Xiaolun collapsed on the training field, breathing raggedly beneath a hail of artillery shells and missile strikes. It wasn't tactical instruction or power control drills. They were simply being beaten into shape by pure physical duress. Every morning they ran 20 kilometers. Every afternoon they were transferred to the giant canyon to swim another 20. Ethan shook his head. In their place, he would have complained. Kryptonians weren't made for marathons and submarine swims. But these two endured it day after day, their determination unbroken. Still, he resolved to speak up soon. There had to be a more efficient way for superpowered trainees to hone their abilities than endless rounds of shellfire and exhaustion, and when he did, perhaps he could spare his friends another bruise or two. Ethan paused, considering his next move. Teaching the others to wield dark energy directly might be the better long-term solution. After all, even the war god of Nostar couldn't fully harness his own divine-slaying power until he'd reached his final form and developed that devastating energy axe technique. Shaking his head, Ethan refocused on his immediate objective. His first target was Ge Xiaolun's void sword. Under cover of darkness, he slipped into her quarters, quietly swapped the real blade for a perfect bioengineered replica, and stowed the genuine artifact in his pack. No one would suspect a thing. Next, he made the same exchange with Liu Chuang's prized weapon, the Black Cutter, replacing it with another flawless clone. With both original weapons now in his possession, Ethan settled into a secluded alcove and began his analysis. He held the Black Cutter in his hands, concentrating as its surface rippled with a shadowy aura. "This blade really lives up to its reputation," he murmured. "Once you awaken its dark energy, it transmutes into pure god-slaying force. It can tear through a divine body in seconds and even break down super gene structures at a molecular level. It may not be as cutting-edge as a solar flare bombardment, but at least it doesn't leave a trail of radioactive fallout." Clasping the hilt, Ethan closed his eyes and let the weapon's power wash over him. His lips curved into a determined smile. With the void sword and the Black Cutter now under his control and their secrets laid bare, he felt one step closer to tipping the balance of power in his favor. He rose to his feet, tucking both weapons securely at his side. It was time to teach the others not just to fight, but to master the darkest energies of all. Chapter 77, Strong Army and Strong Horses. Ethan had just finished refining a batch of god-killing engines, specialized power cores designed to slot directly into weapons. They were based on the same principles as the notorious Black Cutter, but Ethan had tuned their output to more manageable levels. They could still cut through elite defenses, yet they lacked the planet-shattering firepower of the original prototype. At the same time, he wrapped up his in-depth analysis of the Flame Sword's capabilities. The sword's signature move, Flame Bombardment, unleashed an immense sphere of superheated plasma. But its very strength worked against it. The heat scattered over such a vast area that precise strikes were difficult, and the energy dispersed too quickly to guarantee a clean kill. In contrast, the god-killing engines concentrated dark energy into a sharp, focused burst, ideal for eliminating individual targets without collateral damage. Even more important was activation speed. A flame bombardment required tapping into a star's energy field, much like the time Delina needed to prepare her microsolar flares. She couldn't simply raise her hand and unleash a flare at will. Each cast demanded careful channeling. Star energy bombs offered somewhat faster deployment if pre-charged, but they still suffered from cooldowns and limited firing rates. The god-killing engines, however, operated on dark energy principles. They ignited almost instantaneously, with virtually zero warm-up or rid time. In the blink of an eye, a weapon fused with one of Ethan's engines could deliver a single, devastating shot, perfect for the lightning-quick battles he foresaw. Satisfied with his work, Ethan stepped back from his workshop's glowing holotable. His army would soon field not only the toughest soldiers and cavalry in known space, but also weapons that combined speed, precision, and purity of force, a triumvirate of advantage that few foes could hope to match. As long as Ethan can draw on enough dark energy, the god-killing power will keep erupting in successive waves. Paired with its unrivaled destructive strength and precision strike capability, it's clear why god-killing weapons outperform those of the flame tier. Yet even among god-killing armaments, few come close to matching the legendary Black Cutter. As a top-grade relic, it has shattered stars and rewritten the record books in ways no flame-class blade ever could. The Angel's Flame Judgment might boast a vast area of effect, but its power stems from Holy Kesh's divine boon, essentially channeling stellar energies like miniature solar flares. That spectacular show of light and heat is not the flame sword's own doing. It's simply the limit of what the sword can borrow from higher powers. Ethan, by contrast, can obliterate a sun with nothing more than a flick of his wrist. However, here in this realm, he cannot tap into his personal supergenes or chi cultivation techniques. Pragmatically, he must arm his followers with resources drawn from the Super Seminary. What the seminary provides, the so-called no-Star War God supergenes, are nothing more than their standard template, lightly augmented by Ethan's custom tweaks to the original design. Even so, these seminary-issued versions remain far behind the cutting edge of every successive model he has perfected elsewhere. In the universe of Super Seminary, falling even a single evolutionary grade behind can mean the difference between dominion and oblivion. For untold centuries, no one dared unlock the dormant potential of the no-Star War God gene. Instead, the mighty Dinor civilization lived off the prestige of their ancestral capital, proudly asserting that its ancient power alone guaranteed their supremacy across the stars. But now, before Ethan stood several of those dreaded no-Star War gods, each gripping a god-killing sword that pulsed with murderous energy. The very air around them crackled with power capable of unraveling a supergene at a touch. Worse still, they could channel that force into sweeping sword energy blasts. Anyone, truck, especially third-generation warriors, was instantly annihilated, their bodies decomposed at the molecular level. Ethan knew that even the invincible physique granted by the flame sword paled in comparison. A weapon imbued with ordinary flame energy stood no chance against these blades. The god-killing swords were not only powered by their namesake engine, but also forged from dark silver, an alloy infinitely more lethal than any flame could endure. As his heart pounded, Ethan understood there was no turning back. He faced an enemy whose very swords defied the laws of survival. Ethan was confident that no enemy, no matter how many, could wrest the god-killer sword from his grasp, even if they were the fabled no-Star War gods. The only reason a dark silver blade couldn't originally house a gene engine was that pure dark silver lacked the structural capacity. Ethan's solution was elegant. He forged a dark alloy core, installed the god-killing engine within it, and then clad the whole assembly in dark silver. The result was a single sword that fused dark silver's near indestructibility with the god-slaying power of the engine, on par with the legendary Void Sword. In the Super God Academy's hierarchy, dark silver weapons stand at the very summit. Even a hollow shell is virtually unbreakable, and when it assumes its peak beast form, it can shatter any defense. Admittedly, it isn't quite as overwhelmingly powerful as a pure dark silver weapon in direct combat, but the god-killing engine more than makes up for it, capable of ripping apart even true dark silver blades. These warriors, once known as the no-Star War gods, have by right of their Krypton heritage and Ethan's enhancements earned a new title, the Krypton War Gods. To push his power even further, Ethan spliced in the genes of the ancient Tianza overlord, as well as angelic and demonic lineages, granting him both flight and the ability to traverse the stars. Don't be fooled by the Tianza's millennia-old reputation. This version is leagues beyond anything that came before. Ethan hovered at the viewport, watching the Tianjia warriors slice through the void without so much as a recharge. Their native super genes alone let them cross the stars on pure stamina, proof enough of their extraordinary heritage. Each bore a massive pair of jet-black wings, a dramatic contrast to the gilded plumage of the old saints. Those saints, in truth, were nothing more than Krypton's mass-produced peak beast bodies. Formidable, yes, but small potatoes next to a civilization that could spawn 10 third-generation war gods in a single batch. At best, the saints' physiques were a bit more robust. They weren't anywhere near the Tianjia in raw power or endurance. Still, a troubling rumor had reached them, that the angel civilization might see those ebony wings and mistake them for the mark of the black-winged god who once attacked the angels. Ethan frowned. "They've been fed lies, cooked up to sow discord between us," he said. "Do you really think the angels would buy it? We've never harbored grudges against them. Our technology is already advanced. Why would we covet theirs?" He sounded sure of himself, and perhaps he was. After all, Krypton's honor had never faltered. Yet deep down, Ethan couldn't shake the fear that even the smallest seed of doubt might bloom into a war that not even supergenes could avert. Beyond these concerns looms the Styx civilization of the Death Song Academy, an inscrutable race that inspires unease throughout the Super Seminary. Their warriors encase themselves in dark silver carapaces reinforced with black alloy armor and brandish enormous ebony wings. At their head stands the black-winged god, draped entirely in flowing black robes and shadowy feathers. Yet the supreme authority remains Holy Kesha. No one in the seminary dares provoke a rumored super divinity emerging from the remotest edge of space without irrefutable proof of its threat. Ethan himself fears her little. He knows that a precisely detonated supernova could obliterate Holy Kesha, scattering Mirai last atom of her divinity into oblivion. In fact, the only beings capable of posing a genuine challenge to Ethan within the Super Seminary are Jilan, revered as the space principal and time god, and the ever-elusive Dinghai. Even Karl, the death god, represents only a minor obstacle. More remarkable still is the void engine at the heart of the legendary Void Greatsword. Its technology far outstrips any sub-biological system known to the seminary. Inspired by its sheer power, Ethan has claimed this void engine for his own arsenal. He has no intention, however, of using it to rewrite or redefine his own supergenes. The weapon serves a far more immediate purpose. Ethan's mind raced. If he didn't seize control of the narrative with his own void engine, the all-pervasive cosmic forces, the so-called space principles, would inevitably catch up to him. He needed a trump card, a super gene. "Shall I dispatch a team to seize Sunlight's gene backup?" he asked, his voice steady despite the stakes. His lieutenants exchanged glances. The Liang civilization's vault held precisely such a backup, an archive of solar light super gene data, integral to the original timeline's design. With the combined might of his elite squad, they could obliterate Liang's defenses without Ethan leading the charge in person. But victory carried its own peril. If the sun star they targeted began its self-destruct sequence, no one, no matter how powerful, could outrun the cataclysm. Celestial-level strikes still commanded fear in the world of the Super Seminary. And there lay Ethan's true vulnerability. He possessed no super gene backup of his own, nor the ability to tap into solar energies by unlocking Dylena's latent gene fragments. Without that essential spark, every move he made risked being undone by forces far beyond his control. Yet failure was not an option. The Void Engine would rewrite reality, or he would be consumed by it. Chapter 78, Demonic Gene Spread. Ethan's Ice Guard company had barely begun to stand on its feet. In the original timeline, months of rigorous training had honed their skills. In this one, they'd scraped together only days. Worse still, they just endured a massive Tauti invasion that shattered their morale. Recovering from that blow had taken every ounce of willpower they possessed, until Morgana arrived. Summoned by Karl, the god of death, Morgana now held supreme command over the Tauti legions. Standing before a flickering map of Blue Star, she allowed herself a thin, contemptuous smile. "Blue Star harbors a super seminary," she pronounced. "Their scholars and arcane experts will be easy prey when we strike under cover of chaos." Morgana's disdain for the gluttonous Tauti was no secret. They were mere cannon fodder in her eyes. Yet she recognized their value as diversions. To mask her true objective, seizing the nuclear warhead codenamed Donghong 49, she issued her first order: unleash simultaneous assaults on every continent of Blue Star. As the Tauti poured through rifts in the sky, planetary defenses would be spread too thin to notice a small elite force slipping in. Atuo, Morgana's most loyal demon lieutenant, took the lead. He raised his hand, and from the shadows arose the resurrected corpses of fallen demonic champions. Unlike earlier campaigns, when Atuo directed operations from afar, this time he would march at the forefront himself. Each step he took seemed to draw the very air into his wake, as if the world recoiled from his presence. Ethan watched the demonic armada assemble through the viewport of his command ship, his jaw clenched. The Ice Guard Company was exhausted, undertrained, and demoralized, but he could not let fear paralyze him. If Morgana intended to seize Donghong 49, he would not stand idly by. Gathering his officers, he barked, "Prepare for a planetary defense grid. We hold the line here, no matter the cost." Below them, the Tauti forces swarmed. Atuo's host would lead the charge toward the buried vault where Donghong 49 was kept. As the twin suns dipped below the horizon, the final pieces were in place for a battle that would decide the fate of Blue Star, and perhaps the galaxy itself. Morgana watched with satisfaction as the last pieces of her scheme fell into place. Her aim was simple: to plunge Blue Star into utter chaos. The groundwork was complete. Now all she had to do was set her plan in motion. She dispatched covert operatives to steal a nuclear warhead and unleash the Black Wind upon Dorena's dark plane, leaving behind the very program that once controlled it. "The insatiable Tauti stir again," she whispered, already tasting the disorder to come. Far below her hidden lair, the high command of the Black Great Wall convened in urgent session. Around a luminous holomap stood General Du Cao, Counselor Huang Ze, Elder Huang Lao, and the Celestial Dynasty's other senior leaders. Du Cao's finger traced the newly opened wormhole hovering above New York City. "The Tauti civilization has launched a full-scale invasion of Blue Star," he announced. "Their warships have already breached multiple capitals, including ours, and our allies tremble before them." Huang Ze clenched his fists. "What is the status of the Xiangbing Company's counteroffensive?" Du Cao's gaze was steady. "Their forces have been fully restored and stand battle-ready. At my command, they will engage the Tauti without delay." Negotiations with the angelic civilization ended in a firm, unanimous decision. Blue Star would not accept their aid. This time, Delana was not even called in to broker terms. Instead, Ethan stood before Earth's leaders as their sole envoy, a clear vote of confidence from Beijing's highest councils. They had made their choice. Better to stand alone than to cede an ounce of sovereignty. In the vast, circular council chamber, General Huang Ze watched Ethan approach the central dais. The angelic delegate, its wings folded like endless veils of light, hovered beyond the transparent shielding. No, words of consolation passed between them. The angels had learned Earth's will. Ethan raised his chin and spoke deliberately. "Representing Blue Star, I decline your offer of assistance. Our path forward must be ours alone." A faint ripple of disappointment passed over the angel's radiant form. Its voice, when it came, was as soft as starlight. "So be it." Then, without another utterance, it receded into silence. Huang Ze exhaled, exchanging a glance with the other generals. It was done. Now came the harder part. "Then do not fail us," Huang Ze said, rising to his feet. "Authorize the immediate deployment of the Xiangbing Company." A hush fell. To everyone present, it was obvious. Earth faced a stark choice: surrender its autonomy or fight to the end. If the odds proved insurmountable, survival through compromise would have been acceptable. But Ethan's demonstrations of the Xiangbing Company's capabilities had left no doubt. Their genetically enhanced soldiers had outperformed every aerospace-level threat in the simulators, even those modeled on the fearsome Tauti civilization. Ethan inclined his head. "They're ready, sir. Give them 24 hours to mobilize." Huang Ze pressed a button on his console. "Command, prepare the dropships. All units on high alert." As the chamber doors slid shut behind them, the counselors filed out into the fluorescent-lit corridor, their faces set with determination. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant, silent witnesses to humanity's defiant gamble. With the Xiangbing Company at the vanguard and Ethan leading the Council's faith, Blue Star would go into battle on its own terms. And whatever the outcome, no one could say they hadn't fought for every inch of their freedom. Ethan stared at the holomap as the last rays of sunlight vanished below the horizon. Dukao had never mentioned that behind the Tauti civilization lay a god-level empire rivaling even the Death Song Academy. Still, Dukao was convinced the Academy wouldn't intervene over a backwater world like Blue Star. All they had to do was hold out until their super soldiers matured. After that, no one could humiliate their nation. Great civilizations are born of hardship, he reminded himself. So Morgana really did go after the nuclear warhead, he murmured. In that instant, He-She's voice crackled through his comlink. Devil? Morgana's here. He-She had been unaware that the demon who'd captured the crocodile god Thornton was one of Morgana's underlings, nor that Ethan himself had single-handedly destroyed it. Ethan's persistent jamming of dark plane transmissions had starved her sensor arrays of critical data. Now, however, Morgana and her minions made no attempt to conceal themselves. Their presence blazed across every network the moment they declared their intentions. She's thrown in her lot with Blue Star, He-She went on, voice taut. And get this, she's resurrected all her demon legions. Ethan's jaw tightened. Open a dark plane channel to Holy Kesha, he ordered. We need to know exactly what she's planning, and fast. Chapter 7, The Last Warhead. So he went to Blue Star. Kesha's voice was deceptively calm, betraying no alarm, but Ethan recognized the tension beneath her composure. After years in demon hunting, she'd long since grown accustomed to danger. Whenever a demon left a trace, protocol was clear. Dispatch a strike team immediately. Thanks to the Xiangbing Corps' intervention, and the fact that the Sword Daemon Atuo himself led the mission, they'd succeeded in seizing the nuclear device. Where do we detonate it? Kesha asked, folding her arms. Morgana tapped a few keys on her portable console. I've cracked the bomb's security matrix and uploaded the demon gene payload. Once it detonates, radiation will trigger rapid mutation in those genes, and infection will spread through every living organism in the surrounding Kamigawa territory. That means the Hellspawn Atuo unleashed in Fraser, those dozens of thousands slaughtered, will rise again in droves. And the radiation could even spawn new, twisted variants. She glanced up. Not everyone exposed will transform. Supergenes only manifest in compatible hosts. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. There's just one problem. We have only one warhead. Kesha's brow furrowed. One? You sent only a single team. Where did this bomb come from? He exhaled slowly. It's the last one in the Demon Hunter Federation's arsenal. To build our elite hunters, we consolidated 6 or 7 older warheads at the training base. Now, only half a dozen remain. This is the final device. Kesha's eyes narrowed. Then how did Atuo find it in Fraser? He disguised it among the smaller warheads he'd seized on his campaign, Ethan explained. Reprogrammed its safeguard codes, then handed it off to Jiang Lian as she withdrew with the army. She transported it back here. Why would she do that? Kesha demanded. What is Jiang Lian's real agenda? Ethan shook his head. Even she doesn't fully know. Our original orders were simple. Exterminate the sword demon and his demon army. Right after, Jiang Lian appeared, stole the warhead from our custody, and showed us a letter from Demon Emperor Legne. He claims sovereignty over every fragment of demon gene unleashed in the world. Morgana added softly. She says she wants to keep it out of demonic hands. That's why she brought it back. Silence settled over the command tent. Outside, the wind carried faint echoes of distant thunder. With only one bomb and a looming legion of monsters gathering across the continent, Ethan felt the heavy weight of the coming battle settle on his shoulders. All right, he said at last, meeting Kesha's steady gaze. Then we make it count. Morgana studied the data floating before her. When the Sword Daemon Atuo unleashed the demon virus over Fraser, it should have triggered a full-scale infestation. Anyone unable to carry the devil gene would simply die. That fatal flaw plagued the original Supergene project. Only the new Supergene engine system had removed that weakness, enabling every host to survive and become a walking arsenal. Her plan had been bold: detonate a nuclear bomb high in the atmosphere, rain down radiation and devil spores, and spawn the greatest demon horde ever seen. But there was one catch. Ethan, the overgod of the Krypton civilization, might still be on planet Blue. If he hadn't left, dropping a bomb on his homeworld would guarantee his ire. Damn him, Morgana hissed. Despite her confidence, a twinge of fear coiled in her chest. She forced herself to think pragmatically. Is there another target nearby? Her demon lieutenants knelt and answered in unison. Yes, Queen, there's an island nation teeming with life. We could use it. Morgana tapped her rune-carved finger against her desk. Closer. What about the Super Seminary in the Celestial Empire? It's within range. A lieutenant checked the coordinates. Exactly, Your Majesty. We can strike there. Morgana's lips curved into a satisfied smile. Decision made. She began issuing orders to prepare the bomb for launch. No more hesitation. Yes, my queen. Morgana's commanders bowed without hesitation. Moments later, Donghong 49 detonated over the nation of Little Baga. One single warhead couldn't obliterate an entire country, but it did something far more insidious. The radiation unleashed by the blast activated hidden demon genes and unleashed a ravenous demon virus across the land. With over 100 million souls under her spell, Morgana knew the devastation would be immeasurable. Even her most conservative estimates predicted at least 10,000 fledgling demons would emerge from the fallout. If fortune favored her, the horde could swell to 100,000. Individually, these minor demons were fragile prey for the valiant angelic wardens, but in such overwhelming numbers, not even the strongest sword could hold the tide. A tsunami of demonic life was about to drown Little Baga, and nothing in the heavens or on earth could stop it. Chapter 79, The Exploding Black Hole. Morgana stood on the command dais of her flagship, her dark hair whipped by sudden gusts of wind as the Tauti fleet roared into battle. At her signal, the monstrous warships of the Tauti civilization unleashed barrages of plasma beams and antimatter charges, drawing the enemy's fire and masking the true purpose of the engagement, securing the demon civilization's stolen nuclear warhead. For too long, the demon lords had borne the blame for the Xiangbinglian demon skirmish that failed to recover the bomb. In the old alliance, Morgana had been sidelined, unwell, and confined to her quarters, while the forces of Ice and Shadow clashed alone. This time, however, she was determined to see the mission through personally. Every maneuver, every precision strike bore her unmistakable mark. Ethan watched from the tactical bridge, his eyes widening as the battle unfolded. He recognized the target city instantly, a fortified metropolis in the heart of Baga, a nation small enough to escape most galactic maps, yet vitally important to Morgana's design. Its spired towers and glittering domes now quaked under the onslaught of Tauti orbital cannonades. It's impressive how she chose this place, Ethan murmured to his lieutenant. Why here, of all cities? Because Baga's reactor can power a black hole bomb, the lieutenant replied. And Morgana wants that weapon. Once she's got it, nothing can stop her. As the final containment seals on the reactor were blasted open, the demon retrieval team slipped in through the smoke of battle. They secured the cylindrical warhead, a sleek pod no larger than a starfighter cockpit, but more terrifying than any starhammer. At Morgana's command, they withdrew before the Xiangbinglian reinforcements even realized what had been taken. Ethan felt a chill. The demon civilization had long outlawed weaponizing nuclear devices beyond tactical yields. And yet, here they were, complicit in the creation of what amounted to a miniature artificial singularity. With Holy Kesha gone, Morgana had claimed Blue Star as her home. She would never allow the city's spires to be razed by unchecked power. Her careful hand had ensured the bomb was extracted, not detonated, preserving the world she now called her own. He wondered, not for the first time, why Morgana refrained from raining megaton strikes on the Celestial Empire itself. The answer, he suspected, lay in hesitation. She was still unsure who had fled the Empire's court, who might yet return to reclaim throne and vengeance. For now, securing the black hole bomb took precedence over outright annihilation. High above the shattered skyline of Baga's capital, the warhead hummed with dormant fury. Morgana's triumphant voice crackled over the comm. Mission accomplished. Prepare for Phase 2. Ethan drew a deep breath. The next moves would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy, and no one, not even Morgana, could predict where the exploding black hole might strike next. Morgana must have discovered the alterations to the Dark Realm's data network, which introduced an unwelcome variable into our plans. Whether the death god Carl let her in on our modifications remains unclear, but true to her gambler's nature, Morgana forged ahead regardless. After all, decades of meticulous plotting weren't going to be scrapped for one man, even if that man was Ethan. Besides, she and Ethan had no personal grudge. If anything, Morgana had the moral high ground. She'd already been stripped of everything. "Your Majesty," she reminded the Queen with characteristic bluntness, "there is nothing left for you to take from me. What purpose would this serve?" That kind of resentment doesn't vanish overnight. Morgana vowed that once the Holy Kesha crisis was behind her, she would have her reckoning with Ethan. He-She's clone, meanwhile, refused to act recklessly. It didn't yet possess the power to challenge Huaye, let alone stand against Morgana, Demon Number 1, who enjoyed a formidable boost to her strategic processing capabilities. Unaware that Morgana had already transcended to a fourth-generation divine vessel, the clone may have underestimated her. This time, however, He-She had no intention of letting Morgana slip away. Chapter Text, Into the Void. He-She was resolute. She intended to imprison Morgana in a bottle. To carry out her plan, she had already deployed her avatar and enlisted the aid of a fearless tomboy operative, determined to corner the elusive witch. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the Celestial Empire found itself in disgrace. Their own nuclear warhead had detonated over Xiaobaga, an outcome that some radicals celebrated, but one which risked alienating an already uneasy alliance. With the Tao Te civilization looming on Earth's doorstep, such reckless use of nuclear arms could ignite worldwide panic. As diplomats scrambled to diffuse tensions, Ethan slipped away from terrestrial politics and journeyed to the fringe of a distant galaxy. He stepped aboard his scout vessel, heart pounding at the spectacle before him, a genuine, millennia-old black hole, its gaping maw consuming everything, even light itself, with cold efficiency. This was nothing like the synthetic singularity engineered by Huaye's black hole generator, which still required massive infusions of matter to stabilize. Here lay a cosmic behemoth that had feasted on stars for eons. Drawing on his deep interest in void physics, Ethan replayed the theoretical models in his mind. If you could bombard a black hole with a torrent of stellar material, you might trigger the release of void particles, or even harvest void matter itself. But could any weapon generate an assault powerful enough to pry loose such exotic substance from a genuine singularity? Ethan activated his ship's long-range sensors and leaned forward, gazing into the abyss. The answers he sought lay beyond that inky horizon. Ethan watched the black hole's inky maw from the observation chamber, his mind racing with possibility. A sudden spark of inspiration, his own unique gas emissions, might serve as the key. What if he could unleash that gas directly at the event horizon, triggering it to eject the very void particles and void matter the original project had struggled for millions of years to harvest? He recalled every detail of Death Carl's landmark presentation. Carl had proposed deploying tens of thousands of supergiant stars around the black hole, using their immense radiative output to gradually cool its outer regions. Once the temperatures fell low enough, a specially engineered divine host would be sent in to initiate a chemical reaction with the black hole's core matter, extracting vast quantities of exotic substance. Over the course of less than 10 million years, the stars would dim and die under the colossal gravitational strain. Then, in one final cataclysm, the black hole would fracture, unleashing a titanic explosion that cast its innermost matter out into space in a hellish, superheated blast. As that scorching cloud of broken black hole material cooled, it would recombine into supermatter, a class of elements denser and more powerful than anything known. Among these, dark iron was the rarest. Even in experimental dark alloy armors, dark iron accounted for but a few atoms per ton. It was so volatile, so alien, that not even the legendary body of Holy Kesha could withstand its energies for long. And from the same crucible of destruction, void matter itself had first come into being. Ethan compared that drawn-out, star-consuming process to his own plan. By channeling his potent gas stream at the event horizon, he could both chill the black hole's periphery and induce localized reactions that forced void particles outward, eliminating the need for millions of years' worth of stellar cooling or divine hosts. If he succeeded, he would harness the black hole's power directly, sidestepping every logistical nightmare and reducing the timeline from eons to mere hours. A confident smile crossed his face. The universe's darkest secret was within reach, and Ethan was ready to seize it. Ethan gripped his chi with both hands, marveling at how far he'd come. In the depths of that black hole, everything, matter, even time, had been twisted beyond recognition. Yet over 1,000,000 years, reality itself had evolved and upgraded, giving birth to the first void creatures. Then the black hole finally exploded, but its energy shards scattered across the universe, lost to all but the rarest civilizations. Ethan had never imagined he'd one day be capable of such a feat, shattering a black hole. He hadn't devoted all his efforts to the Super Seminary's research. He'd also trained his own chi. Whether by focusing, purifying, condensing, or unleashing it in fusion, annihilation, or explosive bursts, Ethan knew that true power lay in mastery over this primal energy. In legends, martial warriors wielded it crudely, Qi Yuan Zhan, sealing waves, and so on. But Ethan believed Qi could be truly limitless, an omnipotent force waiting for him to unlock its fullest potential. Ethan's aura flared as his combat power rocketed well past 50 million, more than enough to shatter a black hole no larger than a solar system. He steadied himself and shouted, "Big Bang!" Drawing on his newest technique, Ethan blended positive and negative chi into a self-reinforcing annihilation field designed to multiply his output exponentially. He knew he couldn't level the entire Milky Way, at least not yet, so he resolved to test this move on the black hole before him. In his palms, 2 spheres of chi ignited, one inky black, the other brilliant white. Ethan pressed his hands together, chanting under his breath as energy crackled between his fingertips. Rather than adopting the classic waist-level stance, he aimed directly at the churning void. The black and white energies twisted and collided, their friction sending a runaway surge of power radiating outward. With a final roar, Ethan released the charged sphere. It tore through the black hole's event horizon like a blade through silk, unleashing shockwaves that rippled across the void. Space itself quivered, distant stars momentarily dimming as gravity spasmed under the onslaught. When the light finally died down, where the singularity had been there remained only a scattering of cosmic debris, a testament to Ethan's staggering power and the promise of even greater feats to come. Ethan thrust his palms forward, unleashing a blinding, rainbow-hued beam of energy. The moment it left his hands, the beam swelled with impossible speed. What began as 100 meters across exploded into a column hundreds of kilometers wide. It cleaved through the starry void, tearing the heavens apart as its prismatic radiance bathed the entire galaxy. Then, as if caught in the black hole's titanic grip, the beam curved back on itself, twisting into a perfect ring under the singularity's overwhelming gravity, the chi wave bending irresistibly toward its dark center. Chapter 80. Nothing silence reigned in the void, no sound, only the sight of a black hole detonating against the backdrop of 1,000 scintillating stars. Ethan was hurled by the shockwave, but planted his feet firmly on empty space. A roaring surge of power coursed through him, amplifying his strength in an instant. He gasped, astonished at his own growth. I just unleashed everything I've got, and I'm even stronger? Had he broken through his limiter? It wasn't enough. He still needed to engineer the ultimate void engine and rewrite his own genetic code, so he could become the strongest Kryptonian across all dimensions. Void particles, he whispered. Ethan extended his arms and reached out into the aftermath of the black hole's collapse. Infinitesimal motes of void energy flooded the void, careening into one another and igniting fresh bursts of power. He absorbed them effortlessly. Even at the subatomic level, his body remained invulnerable. He paused, brow furrowed. These readings, dark element signatures? I've never seen anything like it. In that moment, the black hole's cataclysmic flash dwindled to nothing, leaving only the calm emptiness of space, and Ethan, standing at the epicenter of a brand new power. It's essentially impossible for a black hole to explode in the conventional sense. At most, it can evaporate or self-annihilate, and even those outcomes are little more than educated guesses. No one really knows what happens when a true black hole meets its end. Theoretical evaporation or annihilation would unleash a burst of energy far greater than a supernova, and unlike a stellar blast, its aftereffects wouldn't fade quickly. Even at the level of subatomic particles, everything inside and around a dying black hole goes utterly berserk. But Ethan's supercomputer fast mind had cataloged and analyzed every microscopic constituent. He found no trace of the void particles he was hunting. Instead, the sensors detected vast quantities of mysterious dark elements, a form of matter now being called void matter. Ethan stared at the readouts in confusion. What's going on? Are we really going to need an actual supernova to disrupt this thing? Why can't we just blast it with chi of equal or even greater power? He shook his head. It didn't make sense. With Death God Carl's might backing him and the big clock, the most advanced celestial-level supercomputer in the known universe, he should have no trouble generating energy on the order of tens of thousands of exploding stars. Yet somehow, even that seemingly limitless power wasn't enough. Ethan paused to consider the implications. Even if his device drew purely on dark energy, unleashing such a colossal burst was hardly impossible. Dark energy, like light energy, is effectively limitless, perhaps even more so. Stars turn gas into energy through nuclear fusion, he reminded himself. There's no reason gas couldn't convert the same way. He chose patience. If the void particles hadn't appeared yet, they might show up any moment. In the meantime, the detonation of a black hole in the Moss Galaxy hadn't gone unnoticed. Any super-divine civilization with a celestial supercomputer could scan the known universe for anomalies, especially one as staggering as a black hole's catastrophic explosion. On the observation deck of the Grand Chronometer, Death God Carl studied the incoming data. The black hole in the Moss Galaxy was destroyed by an enormous energy discharge, he murmured. Carl tapped the console. Could it be the work of the Liang civilization? He'd already partnered with Liang to bring the Holy Kesha offline, but he'd never proposed blowing up a black hole. The chronometer's sensors hummed and then issued a terse report. No stellar reaction detected. Carl narrowed his eyes. The readings didn't make sense. Whoever or whatever had done this was hiding its trail. And now, Carl realized the true architect of the explosion might be closer to home than anyone suspected. All stars remain stable. None are collapsing into black holes, announced the gray T-clock, commencing void particle scan. Carl, the god of death, frowned and waited. When the machine chimed again, he heard, "Scan complete. No void particles detected." Void particles? Carl stared at the readout, perplexed. Had the Moss Galaxy truly produced zero? He tapped a rune on the clock's obsidian surface, then analyzed for void matter conversion. The gears whirred. After a moment, the clock's voice returned, hushed yet precise. Analysis complete. The Moss Galaxy has converted precisely 0.00001% of its mass into void matter. Even such a fraction is colossal on a galactic scale, Carl thought. The raw potential of that void matter, enough to forge countless weapons, power whole fleets, even fuel entire starship engines of the Void Armada. "Gather it all," he commanded. "Every speck. I want new void cannons calibrated by dawn." Carl still didn't understand why no free-floating void particles had been detected, only bound void matter. But he cared little. The harvest alone was a windfall. "Has there been a black hole explosion?" he mused aloud, running a celestial query. Nearby, Holy Kesha glanced at her own console. Her ivory-white robe swirled as she leaned forward, eyes flicking across star charts. "No explosions," she reported. "All neighboring stars are intact and stable. The only anomaly is that several have dimmed beyond expected thresholds." Kesha's brow furrowed. A galaxy quietly converting itself into void matter, and stars going unaccountably dark. Something unseen was at work, and neither god yet grasped its scope. Ethan studied the readings from the distant dim stars. Their energies had clearly been siphoned off, but not nearly enough to collapse into black holes. He frowned. This isn't a natural phenomenon. Within the Super Seminary's celestial supercomputer Nexus, Holy Kesha's holographic avatar shimmered into view. She smiled. "Of course it isn't. In the known universe, every event is calculated and forecast by the supercomputer, unless it happens out in marginal space, where the certainties break down. There's no room for true randomness here." By design, the seminary's Nexus enforced near-absolute predictability. 99% of cosmic occurrences are nailed down to the last detail. Anything that falls outside those parameters is blamed on interference, noise from neighboring celestial bodies tampering with the supercomputer's processes. Kesha tapped the projected star field. It looks as though Carl's grandson intends to replace the star entirely. Ethan's virtual form stiffened. He couldn't wait? Kesha's smile turned wry. Curious, isn't it? Did Death Carl seize this opportunity before I logged off, or is he deliberately baiting me into a trap? The god of death's grandson, Carl, almost certainly has ulterior motives, Ethan warned, his brow creasing with concern. Holy Kesha waved away his worry with a confident smile. Don't fret, old goblin. Nothing's going to happen to me, and I still believe in every one of your technological marvels. After all, haven't they served us well these past years? Ethan forced a nod, though misgivings lingered. Kesha's faith in his inventions was unshakable, and she was far more intrigued by Carl's hidden agenda than he was. Even more tantalizing to her were the scheming of her reckless sister and the proud Liang civilization. Danger only spurred her on. Backing down now would tarnish both her personal honor and the prestige of the angelic realms. Morgana and Death Carl were already banking on her participation, and since they'd extended the invitation first, she had every intention of showing up. Ethan straightened, pride lighting his eyes. I'm relieved you understand. While you're away, you can count on me to keep everything in the angelic civilization running smoothly. Kesha's smile sharpened as she glanced back toward the sky, where distant storm clouds gathered. Speaking of which, she paused, her expression growing serious. And with that, Holy Kesha set off on the path that would draw her deeper into Ka-RL's web and bind her fate to forces she scarcely understood. Ethan didn't reply, and he certainly didn't intend to tell Saint Kesha about his plan to slip off to Blue Star. He wanted to stage a surprise for Morgana and Death Carl. If he arrived unannounced, Morgana might quite literally jump out of her skin. Saint Kesha ended the covert transmission with a single troubled word, black hole. She turned to the glowing display of the Sacred Knowledge Repository. The Void's signature had weakened drastically. Someone or something had drained much of its power. Could it really be the work of Carl, the god of death? Meanwhile, Ethan pored over the energy readings, scrutinizing both microscopic fluctuations and large-scale anomalies. But he found no lingering void particles, no telltale strands of stolen power, nothing. The Void's presence was gone. Ethan frowned. Carl's handiwork would have to account for the missing energy and whatever consequences might follow.